Yeah, well, that's a start.
Ellie, are you good with the intro?
Yep, got it right here.
Hey, how's it going?
Well, I know where Mike is tonight. He's out at the fair. Out at the fair.
Then he said she wasn't entirely sure about Charlie, but thought he mentioned something about a combine breaking.
Oh.
And this is the time of the year when that rises in importance. And what a hot day for it. Good
Yeah.
night, that's hot out there. Oh, really?
Oh my God, it's on there.
Yeah.
I think that, and then they add that heat index. I don't know what that is.
I mean, no, that's the highest probably. It doesn't say the hit. Maybe.
Yeah, if we have to, we can go ahead
112.
and we can do that. Can't remember the procedure on that.
Don't you hate that?
As I was saying out earlier to somebody else, that at least it's not Phoenix, right?
Can you check
At least we're not in Phoenix
Hong Kong.
to do?
for more than one reason.
I was there in their airport. It's the closest I've been to it.
The room is ready.
All right. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to the July 26th meeting of the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Commission. This is a hybrid format meeting in that we have a Zoom audience. Our participation's available. And Ellie, if you would please kind of walk us through the rules of that meeting.
My name is Ellie Mullins, planner, and I will be helping to facilitate the Zoom video portion of the meeting. I will work alongside the chair to facilitate the meeting proceedings. I have a few housekeeping items for this hybrid meeting. The meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and cable channel 25. Please remember to mute yourself during the meeting when you are not speaking. The chat function for this public meeting is disabled. All chats will go directly to me. Unless you are participating during the meeting, please turn your video off. This allows the active video meeting participants to be seen on screen. You will still be able to hear the meeting. When you are participating, please turn your video on. If you have any trouble, you can send a chat to me. The city reserves the right to mute people or turn individual videos off to minimize distractions during the meeting. And now I will turn the meeting back over to the chair.
Thanks, Ellie. All right, first up is to receive a motion to receive and approve the minutes from our last month's meeting. Entertain a motion for that. Mr. Carter, second. Mr. Ashworth?
I
And
must abstain.
You're going to abstain. All right. So we're going to be in a voice vote with everybody being here tonight. And if you would please just give a show of hands along with an aye. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? 2 abstentions? Right? All right, moving on to receiving some reports from committees that met over the past month. And Commissioner Carter, the first up is Metropolitan Planning Organization Poly Board. I understand it wasn't a meeting last month, so no update for that, although we do have an item. Last item is a product of some of that work. All right. There are 2 other items on here. One is Land Development Update Steering Committee. I'm going to not provide an update on that tonight since item number 1 is a deep dive into that topic. If there's any other questions from me about the steering committee work, then we can talk about it then. But Elizabeth's going to cover all of the meat and way more than I could possibly do. The third committee to give updates on is the wind regulations ad hoc team. And I've got a few things to update the commission on and the public. First up, a major milestone was reached last week with the completion of the first read and inputs on draft 1 of the code. We've been working on that since March, meeting almost every week, many meetings. So quite pleased that we've gotten to that point. That doesn't mean that the draft is complete and ready to go yet. We still have quite a bit of work to follow up on that. Some of those things include next week, August 3rd. It's our intention if we can get everything put in place, that we'll have a QA session with industry where we'll sit down. This isn't for them to give inputs. This is for us to, as an ad hoc committee, to ask questions that we need to ask for clarification on things that we believe make sense inside of our regulations. On the 9th, we have a regular Planning Commission mid-month. There's 2 items planned for that. One of those is going to be a broader summary of where we are, the process we've gone through and from the committee to the Planning Commission. And we'll click into a handful of items, including a preview of some of the conversations we're having around setbacks. There's not going to be any vote. It's a study session, so there's not a business meeting. There will be no vote. But we'll begin to lay out what we've been talking about so that you can get a sense for what's going to be coming up for you. We'll continue from there to clean up, and once draft 2 is ready, we'll release it. And I'm going to stick my neck out just a little bit and say we hope by the end of August we'll have draft 2 cleaned and ready for sharing. Please don't kill me if it takes just a little bit longer than that, because there's just an enormous amount of work there. Once that happens, though, we kick off another round of reviews with public, legal, county staff. Any number of different groups that are stakeholders in this are going to be going through deep reviews and giving their edits and feedback. All of that has to be consolidated before we end up with our final draft that will then come to the Planning Commission for discussion in a public hearing where we'll have a vote and make recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners. And of course, that's the last step. Whatever our recommendation is then goes to the Board of County Commissioners for a vote. So that's what we've been doing, kind of where we are, and the next few steps. Right? Fair enough? All right. With that, move on to the next part of our agenda, talk about communications. The question, do we have any written communications from the public to receive?
They were all included as part of your packet.
Thank you. Any written communications from staff, planning commissioners, or other commissioners?
Just one to highlight for note that was a little bit of a late addition. For item number 4, staff had added a memo today that kind of had some information related to rezoning as part of that one, and staff will go into that as part of that item.
As part when we read that? Okay, thank you. Any written action of any waiver request determinations made by the city engineer?
None this evening.
All right. Does any commissioner need to disclose any ex parte communications? Will we get into the items tonight? Seeing none. Any declarations of abstention? Does any commissioner need to abstain from an item tonight? Seeing none. Move on to general public comment. This is a time in our meeting where we provide a space for anyone in the public to address the Planning Commission with any comments, thoughts that they have. This is designed to be about things not on the agenda tonight. We'll have public comment when it gets to those items specifically. Does anyone have any comments that they'd like to make on, just in general, not about items tonight? I don't see any. Ellie, anyone on Zoom? Oh, yes, sir. Please come up. Please come up. If you would, please state your name, and you'll have 3 minutes to share your comments.
Question, it might not be in my 3 minutes, if I may. I didn't understand public comments at this point. Can they be upon one of the items, the wind report of the ad hoc committee?
If you want to talk about wind, this would be the time to do it because we don't have wind anywhere in the formal agenda, so this would be the time to make those comments.
Okay, thank you very much.
You bet.
Now, if I may start, I would like to recommend a setback from the property line of any non-participating landowners in unincorporated portions of Douglas County for any new CWEX projects or the expansion of existing CWEX projects will not be less than the setback from the boundary of any incorporated portion of Douglas County. I'm kind of new to some of these discussions, and I've been told that someone has said that that setback, for instance, in the city of Lawrence is 3 miles, and that that's reserved because of land acquisition for annexation. I don't see that as a real reason for ignoring that setback. I think that if I wanted to, I'm a non-participating landowner in Douglas County, and I don't see that that has any more importance to annex land around the city than if I would want to annex, i.e. buy some land around my property. The intent there I see is to keep the wind farms, CWEX, away from city property or annexation of city property. Therefore, it seems to me that it's totally unfair to allow annexation. Do I have a timing?
You're okay. You're okay. 3 minutes, please. Yep, but you're doing
Okay.
great.
That it's totally unfair for me to have to have that regulation on top of me. In other words, what's good for the goose ought to be good for the gander. If you don't want to see, because of annexation, you don't want to see wind farms within 3 miles, I don't want to see wind farms within 3 miles of myself either. And so I'm saying any incorporated part of the county, if they impose a setback of their own, I'd say that the regulations should say that the new or expansion of the existing CWEX should be the same setback. So that if you want to annex, you can still annex. You can annex around that wind farm, or perhaps the wind farm takes up a lot of area. But to say that you don't want them in your backyard, i.e. City of Lawrence, I know you're the Planning Commission and not specifically any one individual, but you don't want to see them in your backyard. I don't want to see them in my backyard. Have I gone over?
I do need to ask you to wrap up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am. Please, if you'd share your name, that'd be great.
Good evening, Melanie Kaufman. This also has to do with wind regulations. There are major red flags and conflicts of interest with the regulations. NextEra is allowed to influence and suggest rewrites to the Douglas County regulations in their best interest and not in the public's. Number 2, Pulsanini is representing NextEra. Number 3, a Douglas County Planning Commissioner works for Pulsanini. With reference to the first red flag, for example, Pulsanini's attempts to change the Douglas County's draft regulations about communications interference from more explicit to less explicit is itself suspect. The language they use to suggest the change is the CWEX and its associated facilities shall not be operated so as to cause microwave, television, radio, telecommunications, or navigation interference contrary to Federal Communications Commission, FCC regulations, or other laws. Sounds fine on the surface, but when WDAF TV4 news problem solvers investigated a case of extreme television interference in Amity, Missouri, they could not find a single government agency that regulated television reception, including Federal Communications Commission, because there was no government regulation. To solve the television interference problem, it was up to NextEra, which according to the contractor would have cost millions of dollars to resolve, something he doubted NextEra would have wanted to have done. In addition to this example, NextEra further attempted to delete the portion of Douglas County regulations that included 911 dispatch, our safety, cell phone reception, our safety. And they wanted to remove the responsibility to mitigate the disruption at the operators, their expense. Their intent is not to protect the welfare and safety of the public, but to make it easier for them to sidestep problems with electromagnetic fields and communications interference. The International Telecommunication Union says wind turbine interference with digital television signals is up to 8.3 miles. The setback for non-participating landowners must be 8 miles. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else care to speak tonight?
Couldn't see for the poll, so I didn't know if I was butting in. My name's Lori Shuck. I live in
Lori.
southwestern Douglas County. Many of you, I see some new faces. You all come to love me, I'm sure, sooner or later. I listened to the piece that you guys did with Black and Veatch on June 6th, and I had a concern I just wanted to share so that maybe you'd have it in the back of your mind as you dealt with them. Who we all know, they support something different than I do anyway. They talked about having setbacks not so much for real estate that is farmland. They didn't seem that was necessary. It should be more for homes, which is good. But they thought those weren't necessary. Well, there's a trespass law that you can't build close to a wind field. You can't, there's a weird encroaching map. So actually on your land, even if you're non-participating, it limits what you can do in that area. For me personally, I looked out the window and I thought, well, that 80 acres, if I was going to build a new house, I think I'd build it over there on that 80 acres. If we can't make retirement, that 80 acres becomes housing we can sell, or lots we can sell for housing. So for us, farmland should stand by the same standards as a house. My property line should be respected, whether it's Beans or me, and because that's not always the way it's going to be forever. And as I'd said before, I'd much rather pay for nice young families to go to our schools than I would have windmills going on. So that's it. Just please don't make that division. Keep in mind there's some of us that consider that property part of our future, our kids' future. They may want to build on it. You know, don't put any limitations on it.
Thanks, Lori.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening.
I'm Lois Ardall. Okay, we had a meeting, the committee did with NextEra. Dr. Olson made a point that the setback, for we wouldn't have to hear it, and the best for us was a mile setback. So I don't even know why we're even considering anything less than a mile, because it come from their expert. And we've got it on recording of him saying this. So I don't even know why we're even discussing anything less than a mile. That's all I got to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? General public comment not related to an item tonight? Ellie, anyone online?
I don't see anyone.
Going. Sure? All right. We'll move into our first item. Thank you all very much for being here, by the way. Appreciate your feedback tonight. We're going to move on to our regular agenda, and the first item up is to receive an update on a really important body of work that's going on in the update of our land development code. And Elizabeth Garvin from Clarion, the consulting group that's been hired by the City of Lawrence, is here. I believe you're here, aren't you, Elizabeth?
I'm online.
Awesome. Is online on Zoom to walk us through this update. On to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much. We have a PowerPoint to share with you. I'm going to do part of the presentation, and my colleague Gabby Hart is going to do part of the presentation. So we'll just jump in and get started. Whoops. All right. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, so we are in the midst of drafting the updated, the contents of the updated land development code. And we have had a couple meetings with our steering committee about the zoning districts and the uses, and also a lot of really great public outreach. So I'm going to jump into the presentation. We'll tell you what we've been drafting, what we've been hearing, and where we think we're going next. So we're reminding everyone our project goals to simplify a set of development procedures, to identify opportunities to meet the city's goals. And for our project, those goals are primarily the goals and strategies of Plan 2040 and the downtown plan, and other relevant land development policy documents that the city has put together. We have a goal of making the land development code more user-friendly and creating more predictable development outcomes. So here's a summary of our updates. The draft document is posted on the project website. It is open for comments. If anyone on Planning Commission is interested in joining in the comments or just seeing what other comments are coming in, it is set up in a format that allows comments to be shared across all readers. So in this group of drafting, we presented Articles 2 through 8, which are the zone districts and the use standards, and then Article 19, which are the first third of the measurements and definitions. We update measurements and definitions with each piece of drafting that we do. So I'm just going to go through these and highlight some of the things that are going on in the changes here. So in terms of navigating content, We've moved things into more tables so you can more quickly zero in on the information you're looking for. We've added page headers and footers, small but practical change that you can make to make a code more readable. We've added graphics, tables, and flow charts. There'll be more of that to come, particularly in the next section. And then we have some cross-references included where they're applicable. Because this is the first third of 3 parts of drafting, we can't do all of the cross-references yet. In terms of the zoning districts, changes from the current land development code that we've made. Now, a second. We've reduced the number of zoning districts with the goal of making the remaining districts a little more expansive and flexible. This reflects a few desires in Plan 2040 and things that we've heard from steering committee and the community. We want to see a greater mix of housing types, of development types, and the older version of you can only do one type of housing or one type of development in one zone district is something that we'll be moving away from to allow more opportunities for flexibility and mix of uses and structures. We've added common page layout so you can compare fairly easily what is allowed in one zone district with what is allowed in another zone district. And then we've added some graphics that help show how the dimensional standards are applied in the districts. We've taken the density and dimensional standards from separate sections and moved them into each zoning district. So if I'm a property owner and I know that I'm zoned R2, and I perhaps think I want to be zoned R3, I can just look at a few pages within the code to figure out some of the basic differences in those districts. And then we've revised some of the building and lot standards to simplify the regulations. Sometimes regulations have, additional standards in them that don't necessarily add a lot in terms of the development outcome, but they do reduce the amount of lot that's available for development. So we've looked into the different standards to figure out what can stay and what can go. Whoops. So one of the things that we're doing with steering committee, and we'll be doing more as we move into public discussions down the road, is a refresher on what Plan 2040 is telling us and how that gets translated into updated regulations. So we want to kind of ground this conversation around residential zoning districts and uses in the priorities expressed in Plan 2040. So that includes a variety of housing types. We're looking at single family, townhome, zero lot line, accessory dwellings, cluster housing, apartments, not everything everywhere, but we are recommending some changes to the types of housing structures allowed in different places, and we'll talk about that. We're mindful that the plan wants to see integration of higher density residential development through compatible design. We've created a district specifically for higher density residential development, and we are working on the design standards right now. That'll be part of the next draft, so we'll be bringing that all together. We know we want to maintain the form and pattern of established neighborhoods. That doesn't necessarily mean maintaining the single family development in some established neighborhoods, and we're talking about what does it mean if we start allowing duplexes in areas that are more single family, or if we even branch out into triplexes or townhomes. That goes along with the next goal from Plan 2040, look at a variety of housing types and prices. We are very mindful of the cost of housing in Lawrence. We know the city's not going to build its way out of the housing crunch that it's in right now, but we can certainly make it easier within the code to have some of that housing construction come forward over the next 10, 15 years. So we're looking at how we can make changes to the districts to allow that in an appropriate setting so that the housing is in keeping with the neighborhood that exists around it, or if it's a new development, in keeping with the other aspects of that new development. Sort of along the same lines, looking at incorporating a mixture of housing types and styles and densities and price ranges. So we're looking at the built environment in Lawrence to understand where we can fit in some infill development that might provide more housing, but also where we can look at more mixed use development, so where housing and commercial or housing or other retail can go together. And then finally, considering all income ranges when creating new development. So this is a fairly consolidated look at the residential zone districts. In the column on the left, you can see where the existing zone districts, now they'll be called legacy zone districts, have been pulled together into groupings that we can combine into the new zone districts that provide a wider range of development opportunities. So we'll be moving from the numerous residential districts on the left into 5 basic residential districts plus manufactured home park. And as we make these changes, we look to keep as much existing development in place and compliant with the code as possible. We're not trying to displace any existing neighborhoods, but we are saying that the current delineations may be at a little too fine level of detail, and we can kind of allow a mix of lot sizes and a mix of density types, and that will still be in keeping with the neighborhoods. So within the residential districts, some of the changes that we're recommending, introducing new minimum lot area standards specific to the residential use type means a lot to me, might not mean a lot to everybody we're talking to here. So sometimes we don't see development take place because the code inadvertently has standards that stop it from happening. So we might see in a district that townhomes are allowed, but that district has a minimum lot size that's really large, so like 5,000 square feet. And it can be interpreted to say that each of the townhome units has to sit on a 5,000 square foot lot. So now we've built the Taj Mahal of townhomes, and that is possibly not what Lawrence wants to see going forward. So we adjust those standards and say, you know, a typical townhome can sit on a 1,200 square foot lot, an 1,800 square foot lot. So we make that adjustment. The use is still allowed in the district, but the standards better reflect the dimensional requirements for that type of use. So it's in many cases taking things that were allowed and clarifying how they are allowed and what standards apply going forward in an effort to make the code more predictable and to have shared expectations about those development types. So we've combined some of the accessory building unit standards with the principal building standards in trying to come up with a clean set of standards that are generally applicable, and these will be helpful again in that sort of predictability place. We may have inadvertent conflicts in some of those standards, and that's one of the things that we're trying to clean up. One of the big changes that we're recommending is introducing a minimum density requirement. Plan 2040 has recommended densities for the different types of development areas for different types of future development. And so the difference would be the way many communities currently work is they say your maximum density or the number of units per acre that are allowed in a certain area is 10. And the minimum density can be you can put 1 unit on 10 acres. Well, if we're trying to get to a maximum density of 10 units to the acre and we don't have a minimum density kind of bringing that floor up, the city isn't going to get the outcomes that they thought they would see coming out of Plan 2040. And so we took the density ranges from the plan and we've worked them into the residential district lineup. So you can see now each district has a minimum density and a maximum density, and that should help get to some of the additional housing development that is going to be needed to tackle some of the housing prices. So if we move on into mixed and commercial zoning districts, so mixed or mixed use development, you can use those interchangeably, are a mix of housing and some other type of development. Usually it's a commercial development. We run into some problems when we mix residential with industrial. Industrial users don't necessarily like to have households near them. Sometimes we see, and we've recommended this in the updated land development code, Mixed use can also be mixed residential and a civic use. So it could be residential and a church or a temple, or it could be residential and a school or a hospital. So those are some of the changes we'll talk about in a minute here. Plan 2040 provides a great deal of support for more mixed-use development in and around Lawrence, not just downtown, not just in commercial areas, but also neighborhood scale mixed use and some redevelopment scale mixed use. So in keeping with those themes, we've made changes to some of the commercial and office zone districts, blended them with some of the higher density residential districts, and created 3 types of mixed districts. So there's mixed small neighborhood. That's supposed to be at a scale that will fit into an existing or new neighborhood and provide sort of those daily needs. Definitely not a Walmart scale, but more of a dry cleaners or breakfast place, coffee shop, something along those lines. Secondly, we see the mixed large neighborhood. So this is a larger scale. It could be a shopping center of some sort. Could be along the scale of, some of the places that we see already in Lawrence, where we have a few restaurants and we might have other shopping going on there, and it kind of blends back into a neighborhood. And this could also be opportunity for redevelopment for some of the shopping areas that have experienced some decline over time. They could be mixed with residential on the site, or they could be rehabbed and become part of the larger neighborhood. We also have a mixed corridor. So this is really the largest scale of mixed development. You can see it's a mix of strip commercial and the current mixed use zoning, which has some great ideas in it, just hasn't been used as extensively as it could be. We're maintaining the CC commercial center zoning that will not be mixed, that is straight commercial. There are too many potential conflicts going on between the uses in that district, and bringing in and blending residential uses. They're pretty auto-oriented and could have some either heavy parking uses or heavy traffic uses. Downtown will remain the same, downtown commercial, but we will be working after this discussion to highlight some of the sub areas from the downtown plan and bring that into the zoning. Possibly not all 11 sub areas. We can see some ways that we can roll those up, but still to provide a greater level of nuance for downtown Lawrence to reflect some of the different character and development types going on there. So we move into downtown. Plan 2040 says, this is the commercial, office, civic, and cultural center of the city. And so it should have a broad mix of uses, and it should be enhanced as an employment destination. Gabby's going to tell you about some of the outreach we did late last week when we were there, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and really gathered up some great ideas for changes in terms of zoning downtown that will help provide spaces for existing businesses to expand, for new businesses to start, to keep that mix of living downtown and enjoying the opportunities for eating out and shopping and being downtown, as well as for the employers who are down there. Some simple fixes might help us move forward and open up some opportunities for additional development downtown. So moving on, we will be working in more detail to bring the Lawrence Master Plan in and thinking about the desirable land uses downtown, so the residential, the retail, the restaurants, the service. It's a great list of desirable land uses, and what we see from the master plan and from our discussions is we don't want any one use to take over downtown. It really should have kind of a fine-tuned balance, and that's part of what we'll be shooting for in updating regulations. So these are, if you haven't looked at the downtown master plan lately, you can see that it's divided into a number of functional sub areas. So kind of different things going on in different places, along with some opportunity sites. And we have discussed these at some of our meetings with community members and people from different parts of the city. Sort of what kind of catalysts are we looking at to see some change or enhanced development in these areas? And that's a piece of what our next round of drafting will be looking at. So we move into industrial and special purpose districts. We find in some communities that industrial can be an afterthought. And in some communities, it's a really a core component of the community. In Lawrence, clearly a core component of the community. Lawrence is a fully rounded, not just a bedroom community. And so you have all of the pieces that keep the economy going. And this is another place where we want to look to strengthen local opportunities, to bear in mind sort of what future industrial development could look like. We are seeing some changes. Industrial was typically really separated out from other uses because we thought it all had smokestacks and all was loud and all was unpleasant to be around. And there are, many ranges of industrial these days, ranging from sort of cottage industry to, serious manufacturing, but it's conducted indoors, is conducted quietly. And the range of locations where that sort of use could take place maybe broadened within the city. Maybe we look at what is the new industrial, what's the future of industrial, and how do we make sure that the city is providing a lot of locational and lot size options and varieties. In this and in the special purpose districts, we also want to make sure that we are maintaining the city's commitment to protecting environmentally sensitive lands, particularly as we see expansion into new and existing development areas or redevelopment. How do we revise the code so that we're balancing out that protective piece of it with the development piece of it? Those things can go together. And as Gabby will talk about in a little bit, how do we build that out with providing housing and addressing equity concerns within the city? We've had a lot of useful conversations about how do we provide open space and green space, particularly in built out areas. How do we, if we're adding density, speak to the green spaces that people need? We know if they live in smaller apartments or smaller units, that neighborhood park is a big deal. And so that's part of our drafting in the next section, but we've spent a great deal of time talking about it recently. I'm going to move on to a change that we learned about in talking with our outreach meetings. So in the industrial zoning districts, you'll see we have done a little bit of consolidation, not a ton. And we thought we could retire the industrial business park. The way it's currently drafted, it reflects sort of an older pattern so sort of the business park pattern, possibly retired with some of our neon clothing from the 80s. But we're learning that actually there's a lot of life left in some of the industrial business park rezoning, in that it can be reconfigured and can be replatted and pieces broken off. And so we are going to reconsider retiring that district and consider sort of keeping it maybe in the senior workforce and figure out what we can do with it going forward. We also have recommended some changes to the GPI in the hospital districts, general public and institutional hospital. And this aligns with what I was talking about a little bit earlier. We want to make it easier for some of these institutional uses to add residential development to their site. And so those will go into, or they'll have an opportunity to go into more of a civic and institutional zoning district that allows residential as a mix in that use. So completing the theme of, hey, where can we add residential? What does it look like to add residential? And how does the residential need to fit into what's going on around it? We've taken a look at all of the opportunities for that. In addition, taking a look at the opportunities for the economic engine of the city. Where's it going and what's it doing? And then I'm going to move forward just a little bit because Gabby's also going to talk to us about how we have some special issues built into this. One of the last changes that we're recommending within the zoning districts is a change to the planned unit development or planned development overlay. So this is something that Lawrence has used. It allows some site negotiation. It allows some changes to the baseline development standards. And it was a beneficial approach to zoning, again, more than a few decades ago. But the way that we draft codes now, we build in a lot of the flexibility that an applicant might normally grab for a plan development to look for. And plan developments don't always age gracefully because they don't anticipate some of the development changes we see in the future. So a simple example of that is we see in many plan developments that they are silent about accessory dwelling uses or actively prohibit accessory dwelling units. And we see a number of communities these days that want to allow property owners to put an ADU in either internally or externally, pretty much anywhere they want to. And so we encourage the code updates to plan for development that stays within the base districts of the code. However, we know planned districts, planned unit development is a necessity, either on occasion or because of the outcome that the applicant's trying to achieve. So we're going to recommend some changes that we've initially called public benefits, but we've bumped a public benefit discussion that was taking place as part of the plan, and we're going to rename these public amenities. And in general, the concept is that an applicant can ask to do planned unit development, provided that they meet the city's standards in any one of the 4 categories that you see here. So sustainability, historic structures and sites, affordable housing, or master plan development. So what are the city's standards for meeting these? They're drafted into the draft, so we'll leave that as a teaser for everyone to take a look at, but we'll use affordable housing as an example. So if an applicant wants to come in and their development is either wholly or partially residential, and they want to do planned unit development because it's going to allow them to do something on the site that is really great and that they want to see, we ask that they provide a percentage of affordable housing linked to the city's definition of affordable housing. So in our initial draft, I believe we set that at 20% of affordable housing. And I think at an area median income of 100 or 110%, and I'm sorry, don't quote me on that. I believe we took it from the city's definition, so it's in there. So if that applicant agrees to match that requirement, then they're allowed to design the rest of their development using the extended flexibility of planned unit development. So we can talk about this more after we finish up the presentation if you've got questions. Finally, last changes we made in this draft are updates to the use tables. You'll see we've consolidated them. There were 2, we've made it 1. For ease of comparison, we know that applicants use use tables fairly extensively. It provides some important information about the developments that they're trying to put together. If you take a look at the draft, one of the things I would ask you to focus on as you're looking at this use table is read the dark blue LDC update key. That's kind of the 1, 2, 3, fourth row down from the title. And that will tell you what the various formatting changes mean within the table. We try to let everyone follow how we're doing the updates in the use table because frequently 6 months from now, we'll have a question and someone will say, well, wasn't this allowed in CN2 to start with? And did you guys make changes to it? And we sort of leave ourselves a trail so we can go back and see what those changes were. So if you're curious why things are in bold or why things are in red or anything along those lines, that's all explained in that update key. You'll see the changes in the use table are intended to reflect the changes in the zone districts, including that greater clarity about how we can do a variety of housing types. And then we updated the use permissions to align with those district consolidations. So I think we talked about this last time we did an update. When we do the consolidations, we tend to go with a more permissive set of standards. And so what does that mean? If we're consolidating 2 districts and duplexes are allowed in one district and not allowed in the other district, we're going to change it so duplexes are allowed in both districts. Our goal is to move the code forward to be more permissive and to not create additional nonconformities. Nonconformities, just for the general public who might be listening to us, is something that doesn't conform to the code and they may not be able to do a lot of development or redevelopment. And that's typically not what we're looking for in a community. It's a very rare case that we really have a nonconformity that we want to lock in place. And so we try to not do that with code changes. So a few other things we did, we have removed some of the existing floor space size limitations. So some of you may remember in a strip center, a grocery store can have 60,000 square feet and some of the other units can only have 50,000 square feet. And if the grocery store decides to move or they go out of business, only a grocery store can go back into the 60,000 square feet. And that's probably unintentional, but it's certainly an outcome that we're not looking for. You'd rather have the space filled than have it sitting empty waiting for that one unicorn use to come back. Other changes we made, we separated the principal and accessory use standards. We want to make sure, particularly with accessory uses, that we're really clear and pretty generous about where we allow them, especially post-COVID, and in this place of the city wanting to see more mixes of uses. It's not always mixes of primary uses. So my residential with the commercial above it, it can be mixes of some accessory uses. So I could have a community clubhouse, and it could have a food stand that is actually, coffee in a restaurant that neighbors could use or other people could use. So we try to pull that apart so we can have a good discussion about it. So I'm going to switch over to Gabby. She's going to walk through some of the special topics that cross a variety of things that we're doing in the code, and then we'll see if you guys have any questions for us. Gabby, I'll just keep sharing if you want to tell me when to switch.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we have 3 of these special topics, which are really just large themes or large opportunities and issues that cross over different portions of the code throughout the development code. They're not only subject to one of these drafts, and those are affordable housing, sustainability, and equity. And for the purpose of this presentation, we'll highlight only those pieces of this module that relate to these topics, but we just want to reiterate that they will be present throughout each of the drafts and through the whole development code. So the first one is affordable housing, and Plan 2040 has a variety of goals and policies related to affordable housing. Everything from encouraging a variety of housing types to also the prices and the income ranges that those houses are available to, as well as the available to residents of all ages. Next slide, please. So again, some highlights from this draft that you'll see. We expanded the range of housing types. So housing types like accessory dwelling units or attached dwellings, so townhomes and duplexes. We expanded just the list, but we also expanded where that list of housing types can go within residential districts as well as within those mixed districts. We updated the dimensional and density standards to remove some of those barriers that Elizabeth mentioned, unintentional ones, to building higher density residential product. And sometimes the words higher density residential product can be a little off-putting, but that means anything from that's higher than, a single family detached home. So higher density as in allowing a duplex instead of just one. It doesn't mean necessarily larger unit complexes. Something that is not yet drafted but will be in a future draft is the idea to create a dedicated manufactured home park district to help preserve and protect the existing stock, since that tends to be a form of what's called naturally occurring affordable housing. And then we also do have the elements of planned unit development that is directly tied to providing affordable housing in residential developments in exchange for some flexibility from the land development code. Next slide, please. Moving into sustainability, there's an entire chapter of Plan 2040 dedicated to this. So obviously we have a lot to incorporate within the Land Development Code to help implement this. So just generally managing land resources and maintaining their natural functions, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, mitigating impacts caused by noise and light pollution. There's a whole article that will be drafted in the next module related to outdoor lighting standards, developing a sustainable multimodal transportation system. So thinking about not just vehicles when designing sites, but thinking about walking, biking, and any other form of transportation. And then also promoting sustainable building practices in development. So that can be done in a variety of ways, but we'll be exploring creating those incentives for those opportunities. Slide. So this table comes from the code assessment, which if you have not had a chance to look at, we encourage you to go take a look. That is also available on the project website for you to read. But as you can see, there is a very large list of ways that the Land Development Code will approach sustainable development outcomes. But I've just highlighted a few, again, related specifically to this module. We will address the rest as we get through the drafting process. But first and foremost, we are introducing mixed use and smaller lot residential zone districts, which help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as well as encourage healthy lifestyle options. And if you go to the next slide, there's a quote from the code assessment related to compact and walkable development. And so that is really what mixed use development or mixed use districts helps facilitate, is more compact and walkable development. But then we will also we also have in this draft regulations related to protecting sensitive lands. So things like the floodplain, and then in future drafts, other sensitive land protection for things like stream buffers and wildlife habitats. Next slide, please. And then the final theme is equity. So Plan 2040 says that planning must consider access and choices for all residents. So that is constantly in the back of our minds as we draft land development codes. Some specific policies from Plan 2040 address, again, and as you can see, all of these themes also intermingle with each other, but varied housing types and prices to provide services and amenities to residents of all ages, to encourage the use of all transportation modes and giving people those mobility options, making sure they're available, ensuring the adequate and equitable access to park, recreation, and open space, and then enhancing connectivity to the built environment. Slide, please. So within this draft, those revised dimensional and density standards that help with affordable housing, also, on the other hand, help with equity. Creating mixed zoning districts allows for a better distribution and therefore better access to more community members to things like schools, employment opportunities, businesses, health services, things like daycares, and also grocery stores. And then we also want to ensure that the term character is not being used to exclude certain neighborhoods or resident population. Next slide, please. So we wanted to take a minute to let you know what we heard during our meetings last week, as well as our steering committee meeting in June, which is not on this slide, but as you can see, we held a wide variety of meetings, and we had a few that were specific topics, so things like the different types of residential districts, the commercial districts downtown, sustainability, affordable housing. We tried to focus those meetings that way if community members had some specific topics that they were more passionate about or wanted to learn more about, they could do so. If you go to the next slide. Some of what we heard, and this is kind of, there's no real rhyme or reason to the order of these, it's just sort of some of the highlights. We heard support for expanding ADU allowances, but also that further discussion on whether or not there should be an owner occupancy requirement is necessary. And an owner occupancy requirement means that the property owner would need to live in either the principal dwelling or the accessory dwelling. We heard some support for expanded duplex allowances in more of the residential districts, but there was concern about the actual design and form of the structure. So we'll be looking at that more, especially in our next module, our next draft. We heard some support for reducing parking requirements. This draft doesn't include those standards, but it did come up a lot, especially when talking about changes to density and dimensional requirements and how parking can also affect how lots can develop and how much building is available. We heard the potential need to actually expand some commercial allowances into one of the residential districts where at the moment not much commercial uses are proposed. And then we heard some concerns that an infill requirement will impact historic and non-covenant neighborhoods. If you go to the next slide. We did start hearing sort of the question and conversation around, if we are increasing density, how does that affect open space? And how does the code reflect that concern? We heard about the need to have more specific plans for a mix of structure types, both residential and non-residential, in future development throughout the city. Related to downtown, building owners are having trouble affording the building out mixed-use buildings downtown, and so it will require incentives to do so. We heard that the height restrictions limit redevelopment downtown. And then a few others, we heard some general concerns about change sort of throughout all of these meetings, whether it was related to residential, mixed use, or industrial use. Just some general concerns about change out there, which is very normal for this process. And then the need for more food sources and also development along the river. Go to the next slide. So that is it for our presentation. So we're happy to go back to any slides that you may want to revisit or have any specific questions for us. We appreciate your time this evening listening to our presentation, and yeah, we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Gabby. So wow, and this is just module one. If you geek out about code, this is pretty crazy, cool stuff. Any comments, questions from the commission?
I just have a quick question. I did attend one of those sessions that you listed, but can you tell me what has been the attendance on these meetings? Do you think you've received a lot of comment from a wide variety of swath across the community?
So that's such a great question, and it's kind of fundamental to the project. These meetings, in the scheme of things, were well attended. We had probably just under 40 people at our first meeting. We averaged, I would say, 10 to 15 people per meeting. People who were very passionate about what's going on in this code. We had people who had read it and had ideas that they wanted to share. As we met with the different groups, particularly as we met with our special topic groups, the housing and the equity and the sustainability, we also asked questions about who else do we need to be reaching out to. What we find in a process like this is it takes a few minutes to get going, and by that I mean a few months, and to get everyone involved. And we're hoping that as we move this module forward and move into sort of post-summer vacation time in August and get going with more series of meetings through September through the year-end holidays, that we will move further into the community we will get a different set of responses. We are working with the city's communication staff to put together some informational flyers about the project that highlight some of the big changes so that we can start sharing with the community. We'd love to hear your feedback on these topics about housing or these topics about neighborhoods or whatever. So we feel like we came away on the whole with very good comments. The list that Gabby just shared is a very thoughtful list of where the community was, and it doubles up with an incredibly thoughtful list from the steering committee, which is of course very representative of Lawrence. So I would say we're fine for where we are, but it's not acceptable for where we're going. And so we intend to push further. We also almost have a outreach meeting in a box ready to be posted on the city's website that neighborhood organizations or community groups or Bunko Pals, whoever, can download and do together, and will help us gather up some more information about the city that we can reflect back through updated regulations. So you'll probably see kind of later in August, sort of the pace of information increase. And as we are spending time in the community, you'll probably see the number of meeting opportunities increase also.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking that. Yep.
Anyone else? Questions? Commissioner Hayden, I see you online. Do you any questions or comments from you?
I do not. Thank you.
All right. I want to be careful about how far I dive down into detail here, but I just want to ask a question about community benefit. You spoke quite a little bit about that, and the first question I have is, what has the feedback from the development community been on the tighter definition of community benefit?
So that's also an excellent question, and that's part of where we realized that we were inadvertently bumping perhaps a sore spot from the comp plan, or perhaps not a sore spot from the comp plan, depending who you are and how that came out. And so I think that we can see a way forward to having this conversation dovetail probably better with what is in the comprehensive plan. And we're hoping to spend a little more time with staff talking through that and flagging it for a steering committee conversation again. I think I'm not surprising anyone on Planning Commission by saying that there are some members of the community who think that public benefits conversation is still open for further interpretation, and there are some who think it's done. And so, from where we sit, we know that either way, if we're doing it through planned unit development or we're looking at what the comprehensive plan says, what we have in front of us are some lists of incredibly important issues to the community, and we want to make sure that we're reflecting them in the code with their proper level of importance. So we're going to look for some more clarification and then see how we can come back and meaningfully talk about both our amenities list and the plan's public benefits list, and see if there are issues left to resolve along the way. And if you guys want to provide us guidance, we'd be happy to listen to it.
So one more maybe related question. Could you speak just a little bit about how you're thinking and what the group thought is about affordable housing versus housing affordability? Affordable housing in our community has become something a little bit more specific than the topic of housing affordability across the spectrum. So where in that set of things is that conversation going, particularly as it relates back to that community benefit part?
Okay, so I'm thinking before I open my mouth here, which is usually good.
It's a tough question. I don't expect you to.
It's a tough question, and as you laid it out, there's a spectrum of housing, and we think that the code can speak to affordable, technically, like affordable with a capital A. We have people in specific income ranges that qualify for this housing. there is probably a category of workforce housing that is people who are critical to the community, who make salaries that have the current prices of housing are out of reach. And usually this is teachers and librarians fall into this category. People who we don't want, packing it up and moving, to Kansas City or Basehor or some other place where they can find something less expensive, because the quality of life in Lawrence is what they're looking for, and the quality of teachers and librarians. Could be police officers and firefighters. I haven't looked in detail at your housing information, and they typically top out a little higher on the salary scale than some of the other critical employees do, usually EMS workers. So we want to look at how do we make more housing that is affordable to people in that workforce, to local employees who would love to live and work and stay in Lawrence, who we don't want priced out. Then perhaps there's a third category of sometimes when we build more housing, it does impact affordability. We tend to say you're not going to build your way out of a housing crisis, but to the extent that we're not putting pressure on what Gabby labeled as the naturally affordable housing that's already in place, and that we're creating perhaps some units that can come in the $400,000 or $500,000 price range, some units that could come in at 2 and 3, and then where can we go underneath that? We're looking to match housing availability with income, which is a trick these days. And so that's why we're kind of juggling the dimensional numbers and the density numbers and trying to, respect what is already Lawrence and also make room for, current residents to stay and future great residents who you don't have yet, but they will contribute a lot to the community down the road too. So my answer is yes to you. Yes, we would like to talk about all of those things and see how we are creating code that can do that.
These are meaty topics, and one of the cool things about the effort is the broad representation from the community that's involved helping to shape this. Any other comments, questions from Commission? This is, we don't have a vote on this tonight, but I just want to offer, if anybody from the public has any comment they want to make on this before we close and move on? Anyone on Zoom? Oh, yes, please. You say your name.
Jan Miller.
Hi, Jan.
I'm not necessarily here for this topic, but it is very much true to my heart, and I'm glad I got to sit in to listen to this Plan 2040. However, I'm curious, the groups that you talked to, were those open to the public, or were they I know there's a steering committee already established, but I'm curious if there were subgroups, if they were retailers, if they were neighborhoods, if they were, East Lawrence neighborhood associations versus, neighborhoods that just had their schools closed. I'm just curious. I really liked your question of, is the input broad enough? And so that is what I would like to just comment on.
Sure.
Even though I didn't intend to.
That's quite all right. I'm glad you
thank
did.
you.
I'm glad you did. Elizabeth, could you speak a little bit to the community engagement plan and who all's able to participate?
I will, thank you. So one of the specific requests that we've received from the City of Lawrence is to ensure that all of our meetings are open to anyone who wants to drop in. So the way we set them up, I was going to say I'll go back to the slide, but we set them up with particular topics. So people that only want to go to one meeting can focus their efforts on that meeting. So in this round, we had a residential meeting, we had a mixed use and commercial meeting, we had sustainability meetings. And for all of those, anyone is welcome. Most of the time we stick to topics, but we tend to get pulled off topic by parking, no matter what the subject is, which is fine. It's a concern in Lawrence, so we're going to keep talking about it. When we do our next round of meetings, we are hoping to take the same approach to it. We know that there are some organizations that want to get some time with the project as an organization. And so we're talking about ways to do perhaps some dedicated open house meetings where we can do drop-ins with neighborhood organizations or drop-ins with other organizations. But those meetings will still be open to anybody. If we're having a meeting and we're talking about the code, you're welcome to come to the meeting, and we really invite you to. Same with the online comments.
All right, Elizabeth, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments? All right, with that, we'll close this topic. Before we move on to item number 2, does anybody need a break? Are you okay to go?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're going to step into item number 2. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Gabby, very much.
Take care.
We're going to step into item number 2. And before we jump into that, I want to spend just a second and talk about the format of these next few items in terms of public comment. We have an approach to this that's set out in our bylaws that's designed to help make sure that everyone, applicants, public, whatever side of an issue you might be here to talk about tonight, that they're all represented equally and fairly. The way this works is the staff is going to make a presentation, and then the applicant will have 10 minutes on each item that might be before us to give some additional information. After that, the public is allowed to provide any feedback that they'd like to. 3 minutes is a limit on that per person. And once that finishes, then the petitioner, the applicant, will have 5 minutes to respond. Once we close public comment's closed, we won't reopen that. So I want to encourage everyone to say anything that they have on their mind before we close public comment. It'll come back to the commission then for deliberation, and there's occasions where a commissioner might have a specific question to clarify a point that they might ask of the applicant or somebody in the audience. So just wanted to make sure that everybody understood where we're going with that. Item number 2 tonight, we'll jump into it, is to consider a special use permit for River City Church located at 3001 Lawrence Avenue. And I think Avery is here to talk us through that project, or maybe online.
Yes, I'm online. Thank you.
Thanks, Avery.
Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to verify that. And just one more second. Okay, thank you. And good evening, commissioners. Again, my name is Avery Kerner, and I'm a planner with the Planning Division. As the chair mentioned, the item before you now is a special use application for an accessory school use at 3001 Lawrence Avenue. The subject property is located to the northwest of where Lawrence Avenue intersects West 31st Street and is an already developed property with a church building and a surface parking lot. Veritas Christian School currently occupies a portion of the existing church building, and according to the applicant, Veritas entered into a 3-year lease agreement with River City Church and began operating on site a little over a year ago. The Land Development Code allows the school use as an accessory use to an established religious institution, but the portion of the building occupied by Veritas exceeds the gross square footage allowed for the accessory use to be permitted by right, and thus the school use should have received approval through the special use procedures before being established at 3001 Lawrence Avenue. The special use request before you tonight has been submitted by the applicant in an effort to bring the site into compliance with the Land Development Code and receive the appropriate approval for the accessory school use through the special use procedures. The Planning Commission is responsible for reviewing special use requests in accordance with the review and decision-making criteria provided in the staff report, and forwarding a recommendation on the request to the City Commission, who is ultimately the final decision-making body on special use requests. Based on the analysis and findings presented in the staff report, staff is of the opinion that the proposed accessory school use would be compatible with the existing land uses in the area and would be an appropriate use for the site. Staff support and recommendation for the special use request does include conditions that address where and how long the accessory school use should be allowed to operate on site under the current special use application submitted. The conditions also include that there are some minor revisions that should be made to the submitted site plan in order to reflect an updated parking summary, as well as any conditions of approval for the special use. To prevent expansion of the accessory school use into other areas of the site without further review, staff recommends a condition that restricts operation of this accessory school use to the interior of the existing building on site, with an exception to allow for the school to use the existing playground located on the south side of the church building, which faces 31st Street. Staff would also recommend placing a time limit on the approval of the special use. Initially, staff recommended a 2-year time limit. However, the applicant has indicated that Veritas's current lease of the space will terminate on June 30th, 2025. So staff would recommend revising that condition so that approval of the special use expires on the same date as the lease. The full findings of fact can be found in the staff report within your packet. And based on those findings, staff recommends forwarding to the City Commission a recommendation of approval for the proposed accessory school use at 3001 Lawrence Avenue, subject to the conditions listed in the staff report and with a revised recommendation or with a revised recommended expiration date for the special use permit if approved. And with that, I'd be happy to help answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Avery. The applicant I have down here is Aaron Gaspers. Is Aaron with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
I sure can.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Aaron Gaspers, CFS Engineers. Commissioners, thank you for this opportunity. And I believe Avery did a good job covering everything. I will add that I'm submitting information to her the past day or two to meet conditions of approval. So we'll get to that point and that will be taken care of here soon. So I'm here to answer any questions you might have, and thank you very much.
All right, Aaron, thank you very much. We're going to open up public comment. Is there anyone here to speak on this issue tonight? Anyone online?
Doesn't look like it.
Don't see anybody. Anyone on Zoom that's here to speak to the issue of the special use permit tonight?
I don't see any hands.
All right, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission. Who'd like to?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
My question is, although no bicycle parking is required, what do the kids do with their bikes?
Aaron here, I can tackle that. With this being a private school, it's not your typical neighborhood public schools. So the students that come to this school, I would say most of them, I'm not going to say all of them, do not live in biking distance to the school. So as a parent myself who has kids going to that school and drop them off in the morning, I do not even recall any of the students riding their bikes to school at all. So they come from longer distances that I personally wouldn't want my kids riding to the school. So I hope that helps.
Well, I happen to have some neighbors whose kids go to that school, and I live on Free State Lane, which is about a mile and a half away from the school. So I know there are some kids who go. I know that there are kids who ride bikes, and so is it terribly expensive to put things in for kids to park their bikes safely?
I mean, as far as the expense, yes and no. It's not terribly expensive in the grand scheme of things. Honestly, I would have to look out on the site. I want to say that the approved site plan reflects a bike rack, but I'm unsure if it's actually out there or not.
This is Avery Kerner, planning staff, and the previously approved site plan on file for the church or for the existing church facility did require 5 what we would call now short-term bicycle parking spaces. I'm with Aaron. I'm not 100% sure if those are actually on site at this time. In reviewing the waiver request for the bicycle or the waiver request from the bicycle parking standards, that review really focused on, or the waiver request was approved due to the sort of temporary nature of this request as it's currently proposed. The current lease for the school use, it only goes for another 2 years. And there aren't plans or any firm plans for whether the school would stay on site or relocate elsewhere. So because there weren't any other improvements, physical improvements being made or proposed to the site with a special use application, that is what led to the support of the waiver request.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions, comments? Yes.
I have a question for Mr. Gaspers. Could you go into some more detail on the proposed revisions to the site plan and how that reflects any intended changes in use of the site?
Well, at this point, there are no proposed site improvements proposed. The information that's being submitted is being added, call it a page 2, which will document the parking summary reflecting the school use and some additional notes. But that is the limit itself of the site, of what we're adding to the site plan. Other than that, no, there is no proposed site improvements planned at this point.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ashworth.
Just a quick question for staff. I'm just curious, the SUP requirement is based on square footage of the principal use. So is this an example of something that might be, since we just heard the LDC report, is this an example of something that's likely going to change with the Lawrence Development Code, these sorts of square footage requirements?
Excellent question. I don't think we know the answer to that quite yet. Not with Module 1 kind of just being out the door, it's really going to come into Module 2 where we have those design standards that come along with uses. So that's a possibility. We haven't quite gotten all the way into those details just yet.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, thoughts, how you feel about this?
Yeah, I have a question to follow on that last question for the applicant. So I understand that the special use permit requirement here kicks in when the accessory use is more than 25% of the site or of the principal use of the site. So I'm just curious, what is the percentage that is, being used by the school? Do you have those figures?
I don't have the exact figures. I believe, Avery, correct me if I'm wrong, it's 25% use of the building square footage. Is that correct?
Correct. The approximate area that the school use would occupy, I don't have a percentage, but the area, or I guess I should start with the total gross square footage for the existing church building is 64,569 square feet. And then the proposed accessory school use would occupy about 35,284 square feet. So about half.
Got it. And if I may, a separate question for the applicant. So I appreciate that you're here before us tonight to come into conformance and get everything in line the way it should be, but understand that the school has been operating on site there for the past year, so I'm curious what precipitated the application tonight. Was this a neighborhood concern or just a delayed revelation on the school's part that they need to have a special use permit? I
believe it came about building codes when The school was working with the church to make sure that everything was in compliance on the inside of the building, is when the revelation came that based on the church and the number of seats in the sanctuary, and it kind of dominoed into, that we should have a special use permit. So it was the interior code compliance that I believe triggered the finding that this was needed.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I have a question for staff. Given the last question and answer, is this a reflection of some sort of, failure in the process, that a fairly significant, failure to comply with code is only noticed by accident? Is there something within the process that should have been caught sooner or could be caught earlier in the process in the future?
I don't think it's necessarily a failure in the process, because it all hinges on that percentage of square foot as you get in there, because it's accessory to a point and there wouldn't really be much engagement there. But as we all know, sometimes those kind of, you expand a use or you have an extra classroom that could expand into it, and that's hard for us to tell from the outside. And as Aaron noted, that was triggered by, my understanding is it was triggered by a change of use occupancy that was going through the building permit process, and that's what precipitated the way that we came into this item tonight. So I don't necessarily think it's necessarily something maybe that would have been a process failure. It's just probably one of those just misunderstandings that we have in that nuance of Article 5, that if you don't read the whole of the code from beginning to end, you might miss that catch of the accessory use. But as soon as we were notified of it, we went through the processes to go into what you're seeing tonight is for that special use permit.
So if the church wasn't reading the detail of Article 5 of the code, then maybe they would have missed that. I have some sympathy, I guess, for that.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure, of course.
This is also for staff. I mean, my inclination is to apply some skepticism whenever something is just trying to come into compliance. That's why I was trying to understand why this wasn't compliant in the first place. But there have been some observations from a neighbor, for example, about potential traffic and safety issues. But have there been any complaints, any kind of observations from the public since this change has already taken place? This isn't a proposed change in the actual use, only in, coming up to code. So have there been any, complaints from the public or observations about safety or traffic concerns?
That is, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Avery.
Thank you, Jeff. This is Avery from our planning staff, and that's a good question, Commissioner Carter. In reviewing the special use application submitted, given the circumstances, we did look at the cities or our internal systems to see if there had been any documented complaints, questions, comments about the school use existing at this location for the past year, and there were no documented cases of that.
Okay, thank you, Avery.
Good real-time telemetry. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Question. Will the staff now look at the existing site plan and see if it needs to be enforced? On that issue of bike things, if there's supposed to be bike racks on the site plan, is that something the staff will look at and see if it should be enforced?
Yes, as part of the process, we go out there and we will take a look to ensure what is required on site is on site. So if the drawing shows a bike rack and trees and both of them happen to be gone, we would go ahead and have that look as part of this process.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Commissioner Hayden? I don't want to leave you out. Anything? Okay, thank you. So just from my perspective, I have when I think about something that comes to us that's working to get into compliance, I find myself in one of two camps. I either want to understand and defend why it's not in compliance, or I want to do what I can to, help work through the process so that they are. In this particular case, I see this project. I did read the letter on the concerns about traffic. I drove through there, and I drove out to a neighborhood school, and I found that there might even be a little bit better access in and out of this, and particularly onto 31st Street. So I had less of a concern. I don't live right there, but I have a little bit less of a concern. It's a time-limited SUP serving a pretty real need, so I'm inclined to support this request. Any other comments? Anyone care to share? Anyone care to make a motion? Please.
I move that we approve the special use permit for adding an accessory school use to an existing campus or community religious institution, River City Church, located at 3001 Lawrence Avenue, and forward to the City Commission with a recommendation of approval based on the findings presented in the staff report and subject to the conditions listed in the report.
Point of order, if I may, is it subject to the conditions or the revised condition that Avery highlighted?
The revised conditions in the report.
Perfect. Your second?
Second.
Commissioner Munch. Any other comment? Those in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Thank you all very much. Avery, thank you. Moving on to item number 3, we have a pair of variance requests, a rare recommendation to deny, and one recommending that we approve variances both at 1030 Main Street. And Cece Riley has been busy. She's here, I think, to talk to us about this issue. Hi, Cece.
I'm online today, Gary. Thank you very
Awesome,
much.
you bet.
Share my screen one moment. Alrighty, so as Gary mentioned, we have 2 right-of-way variance requests for 1030 Main Street. So a bit of site context. This teal rectangle indicates the subject property. It is on the corner of Main Street and Fambro Drive, across the street from KU's Memorial Stadium. The subject property is being replatted through the minor subdivision process, which requires compliance with the review criteria listed in section 20808D of the Land Development Code. When proposed lots are adjacent to streets or alleys that do not meet the minimum right-of-way standards listed in section 20810E5, criteria 4 requires subdividers to dedicate 1/2 of the additional land necessary to bring the adjacent streets into compliance. So the 2 variances tonight, I'll speak to them distinctly, but just to give an overview. Variance 1 is associated with Fambro Drive. Fambro Drive is a residential collector, and residential collectors require 60 feet of right-of-way. It currently has 50 feet. The applicant has been asked to provide 5 feet of right-of-way along that southern property line to come into compliance. Variance 2 is associated with the alley. Alleys have a 20-foot minimum right-of-way width requirement, and the alley adjacent to this subject property is only 16 feet wide. If the variance were denied, the property owner would be required to dedicate 2 feet of right-of-way for that alley. So I'll speak to the review criteria for variance 1 first. Variance 1 associated with that Fambro Drive width. Criteria 1, strict application of these regulations will create an unnecessary hardship upon the subdivider. When staff reviewed this criteria against the Fambro Drive right-of-way variance request, we found that the existing dwelling on proposed lot 2 of the subject property is located approximately 25 feet from the southern property line. Dedicating 5 feet of right-of-way along the southern property line would make the detached dwelling front setback 20 feet. Subject property is zoned RM12D, of which the front setback requirement is 25 feet. However, as noted in section 2015-03 of the Land Development Code, a previously conforming structure which no longer conforms with the regulations solely as a result of the acquisition of right-of-way shall not constitute a nonconformity. Thus, this structure's front setback would not be considered non-conforming with the Land Development Code if it were to give the 5 feet. Additionally, the city engineer does not support this variance. Of note, the University of Kansas Memorial Stadium redevelopment is proposed at the property directly south of this site, and the plans for how the streets surrounding this development might be impacted, and that has not yet been determined fully. The traffic study is planned for later this year, and that right-of-way might be required as a portion of that traffic impact study for turn lanes or other such improvements. Criteria 2, the proposed variance is in harmony with the intended purpose of these regulations. The plats abutting the north side of Fambro Drive were recorded between 90 to 179 years ago. These properties have not been replatted since their respective recording dates, and thus have not been required to provide additional right-of-way. Fambro Drive was constructed per previous regulations and based on aerial photography appears to be constructed prior to 1995. The city engineer stated Fambro Drive may need to be improved due to the proposed Memorial Stadium project. The additional right-of-way could be used to widen Fambro Drive and install a turn lane as mentioned previously. Of note, a westbound left turn lane was included in Fambro Drive's improvement near the intersection of Illinois Street and Memorial Stadium, east of the parking lot in 2018. The subject property is located within the Oriad neighborhood plan area. This plan was adopted in 2010 and includes goals, policies, and implementation strategies identified by the community. Goal 3 of this Oriad neighborhood plan identifies promoting improvements and maintenance of existing infrastructure on a regular basis and upgrade infrastructure when redevelopment occurs as a priority within the neighborhood. Although the plan does not specify right-of-way width within their goal, meeting the right-of-way width standards would provide a better opportunity for improvements to occur. Widening the existing right-of-way width by 5 feet along that southern property boundary of the proposed plat would better align with the standards in the code and which require 60 feet of right-of-way along a residential collector street. It could be interpreted that due to the university development to the south of Fambro Drive, that this road could be classified as a standard collector, which would require 80 feet of width. However, the remaining width needed to meet the 80 would only be required along the south of Fambro Drive, abutting the non-residential KU property. The University of Kansas provided an additional 15 feet of right-of-way along Fambro in 2018, just 260 feet east of the subject property. Granting the variance may further disrupt the intended purpose of these regulations. Criteria 3, public health, safety, and welfare will be protected. Staff found that when reviewing criteria 3 against variance number 1, that there was no identified safety issues with the existing street right-of-way. However, there may be benefit to widening the street adjacent to the proposed KU Memorial Stadium redevelopment project. Additionally, the Lawrence Bikes Plan identified Fambro Drive, south of the subject property, as a secondary network for bikeway funding in 2019 when the plan was published. The priority and secondary funding networks were developed utilizing the 7 principles of bicycle network design, which include safety, comfort, connectivity, directness, cohesion, attractiveness, and unbroken flow. These principles lead to a successful bicycle network, which enables people of all ages and abilities to safely arrive at their destination. Considering proximity to the University of Kansas and Memorial Stadium, the priority identified for bicycle infrastructure on this segment of Fambro, and the roadway classification as a collector, public health, safety, and welfare will remain protected with the existing conditions. However, more options for safety enhancements will be possible with the extended right-of-way. That is all to say why staff has come to the recommendation for variance 1 to deny the variance request to allow for reduced right-of-way along Fambro. I'm now going to go into variance number 2, the alley width. So as mentioned previously, this plat was a part of Quivera Place replat of Block 27, in 1912. At the time, alleys primarily were 16 feet wide, as is on the entire platted area. Strict application of the regulations would require the property to dedicate 2 feet to the east along the alley to meet the minimum right-of-way standards for only the portion of the street that abuts the subject property. As mentioned previously, the existing right-of-way within the alley is 16 feet wide along the entire block. When speaking to criteria 1, the city engineer is also in support of maintaining the existing right-of-way width for the alley. There are no plans for alley improvement, and that would require the alley to be widened. Requiring the subject property to dedicate additional right-of-way would be unnecessary and a hardship to the subdivider. Criteria 2, regarding the harmony of the intended purpose of these regulations. Many similar lots in the Oread neighborhood have been developed with detached dwellings along the 16-foot wide alley. Additional right-of-way was not dedicated along these properties at the time of their development, and dedication of additional right-of-way along these undeveloped properties is unlikely to occur anytime in the near future. Maintaining the existing right-of-way width at this location along the alley would maintain the established development pattern and setbacks for other developed alleys within the area. Granting a variance from the requirement to dedicate additional right-of-way in the alley would be reasonable given the context of the surrounding subdivision and development pattern. Granting this variance is in harmony with the intended purpose of these regulations. Now speaking to criteria 3, there is no identified safety issues within the existing alley right-of-way, and there are no plans to widen the alleyway. Granting the variance would not harm public health, safety, or welfare. Which all brings me to the recommendation from staff to approve the variance request associated with the alley's right-of-way width reduction, namely reducing the right-of-way width of the alley to the existing 16 feet. And that is all I have for my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I am not aware if the applicant is here today, but Paul Warner, are you on?
Yeah, Paul's in the room with us. Cece, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Mr. Warner?
Good evening. Paul Warner with Paul Warner Architects. Cece, I may want you to put up the slide with the aerial view here, or maybe when I'm done, if I don't know when you can do it. Yes, I decided to come in person, so it's awesome to be here. So let's do the easy one first. Really do appreciate that staff supporting variance number 2 for the alley. I think this is our third. It's probably you guys get them a lot. I got another one coming. And there's got to be a way, I'm thinking, giving Jeff the ability to, when the city engineer supports it and fire supports it, maybe there's a different, you guys could, every alley in the city, almost every alley in the city, 16 feet wide. And I remember a meeting, I want to say 3 months ago, I think all 4 items on your agenda were variances to the subdivision regulations. So I appreciate it and hope that maybe there's a better way to handle it. So the harder one, variance number 1, I'm really not trying to be difficult. But in the scheme of infill and subdivision regulations, I thought this should at least be discussed. I guess I'm struggling with, essentially, and our client is just giving the city 5 feet of right-of-way just because I have to move a lot line. Currently, the lot line goes through the existing stone house that we saved, and because I have to move that lot line is what causes the minor sub, what causes, in theory, having to dedicate this 5 feet of right-of-way. I guess I'm struggling with, because I look at the aerial, and KU has all the ground in the world right across the street. I also struggle a little bit when you read the report, and I might exaggerate, I think it says 4 times we're waiting on KU's traffic study to decide what happens. I kind of feel that's unfair to my client to have to give this 5 feet for whatever reason that we don't know what might be required or what might not. The The other reason, excuse me, and asked CC to put this up is when you look at the aerial, there's 2 houses to the east, right adjacent to the alley, that are built right on the property line. So I'm not sure what my 5 feet or my client's 5 feet does for anybody when the 2 houses just to the east are right on the property line. Currently, the curb line from the street to our property line is 11 feet, which is a pretty decent amount of space already. In emails going back and forth, and I have to compliment CC, she's done a great job with this. We don't get to talk to the engineer, we just hear from MSO, and not quite sure which engineer actually is making all of this. I know Mr. Cronin makes a lot of these decisions, but so I feel for CC being a little stuck in the middle. But in the emails back and forth, the city engineer acknowledges that the 2 houses built to the east are so close to the property line that the proximity to the 2 houses does not preclude road widening on the side of Fambro Drive with a 5-foot curbed tight sidewalk to these property frontages. So when I stare at that and I look at the aerial, knowing that there's not a problem with those structures, again, I feel like my client may be getting penalized for something he shouldn't be. Infill's tough. We're still not very good at it. I won't wear you out, but as CC mentioned, this is in District 1 of the ORIA Design Guidelines. So it already got turned down by the HRC, and I already had to appeal it to the City Commission, which we did win 5-0. So I feel pretty good about that. But I only bring that up to discuss the process. There's nothing easy about infill, so hopefully everything we heard earlier tonight is going to help that. So just so you know, we didn't ignore what we think is the request from the city. My thought was what we really need is a 5-foot pedestrian easement on our south side, north side of the property line, for everything that's in the staff report about the bicycle network and a wider sidewalk and people walking. And especially since there's enough space to widen the street there already, that a 5-foot pedestrian easement on our property would allow a wider sidewalk or a bike lane or whatever the city might want to do in the future. What that does is saves my client from revising a bunch of work that's already been done, again, for 5 feet that I really don't think is going to be used. So I want to go through that, that we're, again, not trying to ignore everything, just like to discuss it with you guys since we have you about how hard infill is, and hopefully the subdivision regulations will get revised, and hopefully you'll have a little bit more authority to approve variances on alleys. But I'd like your support. I know variance number 1's tough. It's tough when the city engineer isn't recommending it, but we'd really rather dedicate a 5-foot pedestrian easement if that's an option. That's all I have.
Mr. Warner, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Is there anyone here from the public to speak on this item? Anyone here in the room or online? No one, Ellie?
No one online.
I don't see anyone. All right, we'll bring this back to the commission. Could I ask us just your thoughts? Do you want to talk quickly about item number 2 as a place to start? Does anyone have any concerns or issues with item 2? Any questions on item 2?
I have a slightly unrelated question. I noticed that in the alleyway, if you had to give that land, the utility poles are right there. What would have happened with the utility poles? May I ask that to Paul?
You bet.
In this case, I think they would be okay, but because it would be expanding the right-of-way, we do get into a bigger issue if, depending on which houses or which other structures those utility poles serve, which may start causing a problem if they're serving a structure to like the north of it. And then we would have to deal with Evergy because they no longer allow their lines to cross a property line.
Thank you.
But luckily, we don't have that issue today.
I'm glad. Bob.
Yeah, great question.
Wow.
Great question. Commissioner Hayden, any question from you on item 2? I don't see her on Zoom. I don't have her in my view.
No.
Okay.
I thought I was shaking my head, but
Oh,
no.
no. Sorry, I can see you now. I can see you now. All right, let's switch over and talk about item 1. Anyone like to begin?
I guess I would like to ask the staff about the proposal from the applicant about the 5 feet easement. How would that even look like for tonight? Is that even possible? Is that something we can consider?
Well, the item before you is really the variance request. Now, an easement could be taken up between the applicant and municipal services and operations as part of that review, but really, you're being asked tonight is either to approve or deny the variance. So that is a possibility that they may choose to pursue, but it's not really in your scope at the moment.
Okay.
So to be clear, the only way to pursue that would be to either deny it and send it back for discussion or defer it and send it back for discussion.
Correct. At that point, if you would like to still retain the ability to see it as it comes back, I would recommend deferral, because if you do deny it, then it does have an appellate route to the city commission for consideration that would continue on its path.
Right, so it'd be deferral, okay. It's the only way to get to that. Does that answer your question, Commissioner Brodo?
Yes, it does.
All right, thank you. Great question.
If you'd like, I can add additional context to that as well. As Paul mentioned, we were emailing back and forth. He had asked about other options after the agenda was posted, to which I asked the city engineer, and he had mentioned the property is required to provide a sidewalk as a part of the plat. The pedestrian easement is not something that would ultimately benefit road improvement or otherwise road expansion. It's currently at a minimum size for this residential collector, and it is abutting non-residential standard collector type of development. So he was not interested in the short term. We didn't have a lot of time to talk about it, but with that pedestrian easement option.
Thank you.
Other questions? Seems like you're ready.
No, I don't have a question. I do have a comment.
Sure.
And that is, I think the process that we go through is very important, and I think we have to deal with our current land code, not what that we're talking about for future land codes. And I think it's painful. I think Mr. Warner raises very good and reasonable objections, but I frankly don't think we've got any power to do anything except follow the staff report and the staff recommendation.
Thank you.
Okay.
If I may, I'm going to ask for a little bit of explication here. Can someone, either Cece or Jeff, talk through, if this is denied, how does the site ultimately get carved up with respect to the requirement to build sidewalks? How much of this property ends up getting taken up by land out of Mr. Werner's control? Because I'll confess, I'm a visual thinker, and I'm looking at the report, and there's nothing here that shows here's what the 5 foot, what the 5 foot variance would look like. I'm having just difficulty looking at the current property, how it would be different with the variance granted, and also this question about the sidewalk. Because and forgive me, Cece, I don't recall seeing that, but it's another. I think it's another concern once construction is planned here, right?
Yes. So considering the zoning district, this property is zoned RM12D, of which has a 25-foot front setback. So that, I can share my screen. I'm sorry I didn't create a visual for that.
That's okay. my
concern.
handicap.
On the fly, see if I can't share. Are you seeing the aerial and then the interactive map?
Yes.
So it's been identified that this property is currently 25 feet from this, or this dwelling is currently 25 feet from this property line. So if I'm thinking about the plat is proposing a division line north-south. So about equal to this would be 25 feet. That is the front setback. If they provide 5 feet of right-of-way, this property will then be 20 feet from that right-of-way. So you can imagine about 5 more feet back is where this property would need to, like the building envelope would exist. Does that assist, Commissioner Carter?
Yes, that's really helpful. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'll keep that in mind for future.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Commissioner Mutch.
Yeah, I have a question for CC or maybe someone else on staff, but I'm just naive on the various tools the city has available to it in the event that it needs to expand a road in the future. So I'm curious. I understand that tonight we're talking about giving up additional right-of-way for this particular property because there's one that brings it in compliance with current standards, but two, there's this concern that this traffic impact study comes back at some point and suggests that that we might need to have a wider road there, et cetera. If that study came back and said, hey, we need to have a middle turn lane all the way down Fambro for several blocks, and this needs to be expanded by 5 or 10 feet, how does that happen with respect to the other property owners that aren't before us tonight? Or would that happen? I'm naive, so I appreciate any explanation.
That is an excellent question, and I'm not sure I have the totality of the answer in my head, but let me kind of go through some of the projects that we've done previously, and one that comes to mind was a very similar instance along, I may have the street wrong, it may not have been 19th, but in my head it's 19th Street. And in that instance there, Municipal Services and Operations went through a process of acquiring rights of way as part of a purchasing process. So they would approach an owner, we need this land, we're looking for an easement. They would go through and acquire through purchasing those items. Now, in instances where there's maybe not an agreement that can be reached, then the city does have the ability to pursue condemnation and go through the process at that point, which is a bit of a different avenue and a route. Typically, though, we try to reach out and work through an effort to see, is there a way the road alignment can be done where it doesn't impact anybody, if at all possible? There are some times where you look at a right-of-way, and it'll be a certain width, and then you'll notice that the road is offset a little bit. That way, you have that ability to kind of buffer it within the right-of-way. And sometimes you can do that, sometimes you can't. But that's really where the traffic studies come in to give us an idea of what kind of turn lanes are needed, if any. Is there any kind of a separation that needs to exist for utilities that may be running either underground or next to the street that we're not aware of that may need an expansion or an adjustment potential there. So it's really as part of that traffic study, part of that look at that right-of-way where MSO goes and does that deep analysis. So it's a little, without that traffic study, it can kind of tell us a lot of things. It may not tell us everything, but it will give us a really good idea of what the future holds for that street and what that configuration may ultimately look like. I hope I've answered all of the parts there.
That's helpful. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Question just for clarification. You got a similar concern here. So if you look at those two houses to the east, you're wondering about future expansion of that road, and that doesn't seem to fit with how close those. But so the critical piece is that the property that's at issue tonight is at the intersection. So it's specifically looking at a potential turn lane there and needing that 5-foot right of way for that turn lane, as opposed to thinking about the rest of the street.
Correct. It's really looking at that one parcel that's before you this evening. And again, the detailing of that may not be fully fleshed out, but that's, I believe, is MSO's concern, is to just make sure there's adequate width depending upon what is necessary to make that transition from Famborough into Maine, or vice versa, depending.
I have another question. question for Cece. We're working with the facts before us. So I don't necessarily want to delve into hypotheticals, but I'll ask. So if it was the case that we had that traffic study in hand today, and it said no changes to the road are necessary, you won't need a turn lane here, would staff be recommending approval of variance 1? Or is that too fact dependent that you don't even want to speculate?
We would have to review at the time. There are other findings, such as the bikeway plan and the ORIAD plan, stating that infrastructure should be improved whenever development occurs. But it is a possibility to defer an item such as this until that traffic study comes in. It could be 6 months from now.
Got it.
It seems like that traffic study is an important part of understanding what that use might be. Am I misunderstanding that?
No, I'd agree. It is important to kind of give us a better understanding of the picture of it. It is critical, as you know, with any development projects. That is a key component in study that we do ask for with any kind of a development that we would be seeing.
Is there any way to compel that information from KU? Is that, I mean, we're stuck here. I mean, when we make a decision to deny, that's it.
Well, if you do make a decision to deny, they do have a route to appeal it to the city commission for its consideration.
Okay, fair. Thank you.
To kind of quote Commissioner Munch on that one, there is with the facts that you have before you this evening that you would have to look and evaluate the case, and that is an open question, I would say, at this point, that we don't have a lot of detail on, because it is really being driven by what that development scheme looks like as it's being sketched out. So it's kind of hard to say. The part that I will note is, there are instances where people have approached the city and asked to regain rights of way as part of the process. So it's not always it's not always a process that it has to go away. So people do approach us and ask us to vacate rights of way in that same instance. So if it does dedicate and then it turns out it doesn't need to be, someone could ask for the vacation of it. The instance, however, and Paul will stop me if I misspeak here, but that would affect their setbacks of the property that they've already lined up and been working on. They've been working off of the line that is currently there. So that may have ramifications for how the site develops today. But just kind of give you the whole picture there.
Yeah. But for that traffic study and the impact of that, I wonder how this would be different than every other variance for consistency down a street that we just go right through. Commissioner Ashworth, did you?
I was just going to say that we've done lots and lots of these where the variance, there's no potential for expansion or significant change in the roadway, so the variances always go forward. But this is different because there is a potential to change the roadway in this case.
Yeah,
essentially what the difference is.
That's true.
So that, at least that's what we're getting from the city engineer, is that for this road, there is a potential, unlike any of the others we've done in the last.
May I ask, is there anyone from the city engineer's office available to answer questions? And forgive me, because how can I put this? We've been through so many of these, and I'm inclined to trust staff's judgment because it is so rare, a rare recommendation to deny. But from a practical standpoint, I would really like to talk to somebody who can explain why 5 to 10 feet are going to have an impact on a lot of this width, given traffic moving at a speed that's got to be able to slow down and make a turn in the allotted distance. And I apologize for invoking common sense, but it doesn't make sense to me. And so, without someone to address that question, I'm inclined to say, well, given the surrounding structures, we've got not only the properties that CC cited between Alabama and the alley, but also the properties on the other side of the street, 1031 Main, which aren't as close to the property line as the ones on Alabama, but, regardless of what the rest of the commission decides tonight, I'm inclined to recommend approval and leave it in the hands of City Commission.
Recommend
approval of the variance.
Deny the denial request?
Yes,
To
exactly.
approve the variance? Okay, all right.
And to Commissioner Carter, your question, Ellie might tell me I'm wrong here, but I don't believe I can see anybody from MSO that's on the call this evening, but that's a bit more of a distance than I can see tonight.
I do not see anyone from MSO.
Okay.
Thank you, Ellie.
Yeah, thank you.
As I understand, maybe this is a question for Mr. Warner, this lot is not unbuildable. Should this variance be denied, this lot is still buildable?
No, the lot is still buildable. It's just some more work on us. And I'm the first to admit, if those two houses to the east weren't where they are at, I'm probably not up here standing asking for this. But that's where I struggle with, what is that improvement going to look like? I don't see the city buying those two houses to add, 3 or 4 feet of a turn lane or something when there's all that land on the other side of the street. So that's why we're here. I think if those two houses weren't that close to the property line, and knowing that every other lot on that street's already built out, I'm probably not here asking for this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hayden?
In an effort,
Oh, go ahead, Cece.
in an effort to speak to, I recognize Dave Cronin or Aaron Parker was the other engineer I was working with on this site. The discussion of those two properties directly to the east of the subject property, we did discuss that as far as, does that create a situation where this lot may not need that 5 feet? And I can read his response verbatim if you'd like, just in the lapse of having him here. And this was, Paul Warner had brought that point to staff and asked us to review with MSO, and so I did so. Aaron and then Dave Cronin responded, agreeing to Aaron's point, said, the examples pointed out are the only instances of homes appearing to be too close to the right-of-way on the north side of Fambro Drive and its extension along KU campus, West 11th Street, to widen the road. This does not set a precedent for the entire 2,100-foot-long extent. Fambro Drive is at the bare minimum pavement width for a collector, 21 feet, and should be widened. The proximity of the two homes at 1029 Alabama and 1029.5 Alabama to the right-of-way does not preclude the road widening on this side of Fambro with a 5-foot curb tight sidewalk at these property frontages.
Okay, thank you, Cece.
Thank you. Other comments, questions? Do people feel like they are at a place they know where they want to go with this one?
Just as
Yes.
a comment as to where I'm standing right now, I recognize that this is a tough call and a unique situation, but I feel like there's too much in flux with respect to this particular area of town and the development and that might be occurring there, and then the traffic that might change there. And with that in mind, I'm inclined to rely on staff's recommendation and vote to deny.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner.
I'll just say that I think, given the review criteria to apply to this, I'm also going to have to agree with the denial in this case, agree with the staff report. Given the proximity to the intersection there and the fact that we've been told that that street is likely to be widened.
I agree.
Yes. Commissioner Hayden, any comments or questions from you? No? Okay. I'm all over the place. I completely agree with the logic on that, and I wish there was some clean way. Either direction, it's going to go to the City Commission for a decision there, and hopefully between now and that time, the information that we're wanting, what you're needing, is going to be made available. That I'm going to line up with city staff in a recommendation. So, I'd start with number 2, if that's okay. Is that okay if I take them out of order, Jeff?
Yes, that's okay.
Start with number 2. Anybody care to make a motion on the second variance request? Please.
I would move that we approve it, subject to the staff report and the staff criteria and the staff finding.
Is that sufficient? Second? Second, Commissioner Ashworth. Any other discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that carries. Motion on the denial of the variance request, item number 1. Anyone care to make a motion? Please, Commissioner Ashworth.
I move we deny a variance from the minimum right-of-way with standards for collector streets as expressed in the subdivision regulations for Maine's 11th Street addition, a minor subdivision located at 1030 Main Street, according to the staff report.
Thank you. And a second?
Second. Mr.
Much? Any other discussion?
I'd just like to say
Yes.
I plan to vote against the denial just to call some more attention to this and also to encourage someone from the city engineer's office to be able to participate in the city commission discussion if necessary.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Those in favor, those in support of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Thank you.
No, sorry.
You did good. You did good. All right. And that is a wrap on item number 3. Does anybody need a quick break before let's take 5 minutes if we could, please. Let's come back in at 8:45, please. All right, shall we, here we go. All right. Folks, thank you so much for your patience. We're going to get ready and start into item number 4 now. I really do appreciate your patience. This is a rezoning request for 10-plus acres at 5200 Wakarusa Drive, and Cece has been working double time, and she's our planner for this item. Cece, walk us through it, please.
Happy to, Gary. Thank you. Share my screen again. Alrighty. So this is project Z2300173. There's been an update to the initial agenda posted. This rezoning is going from A, agricultural, to RM12D. That is what's
That's a big change.
So the subject property, as mentioned, is zoned A, agricultural, outlined in blue on the slide in front of you. This property was annexed into the city of Lawrence on November 21st of 2000 through ordinance number 7299. The property was then rezoned from A to PRD1 on February 19th, 2002 through ordinance number 7493. However, that ordinance contained conditions required of the rezoning, which included the following. The rezoning shall not be effective until the preliminary development plan for the above described property is approved by City Commission and the conditions of approval are fulfilled, including approval of sewer benefit district plans to serve the property. The 10.28 acres included in the rezoning request has not had an approved preliminary development plan applied to the subject property. It was not a part of the preliminary or final development plan, which applied to the property to the east, known as Westwood Hills Townhomes. Therefore, the rezoning's conditions of approval have not been met. The subject property is still zoned A, agricultural, from the previous county zoning regulations. Subject property, outlined in teal again, is 10.28 acres at 5200 Wakarusa Drive. It's within the northwest portion of the city of Lawrence in the Westwood Hills neighborhood. Subject property is adjacent to the city limits, shown in the yellow and blue and otherwise colored entire lots, parcels to the north. The property to the west is within Tier 2 of the urban growth area as shown in Plan 2040. This property, 5200 Wakarusa, is located within Lawrence in Tier 1 within Plan 2040. This area is prioritized for growth and redevelopment because infrastructure and services exist. Specific residential land use goals include maximizing development opportunities within Lawrence before expanding into Tier 2, accommodating infill housing developments in appropriate location, encouraging a variety of housing types, and integrating medium and higher density housing types so that those uses are compatible in density, scale, and aesthetic and are appropriately mixed into larger neighborhood context, as well as creating a safe, functional, and aesthetically unique residential environment for new and redeveloping neighborhoods in Lawrence. Oh, my apologies. This rezoning request would provide the ability to redevelop or to develop an undeveloped property with residential uses through a more streamlined process. This supports the goal of Plan 2040 as it would provide an infill residential development in an established residential area on an undeveloped parcel that is adjacent to utility connections. Some site context. The photo in front of you on the slide, I generally zoned or showed residential zoning RS7, RS10, RS5 in the green color. That overall red shaded area is the planned residential development known as Westwood Hills Townhomes. There's RM12 to the southeast, as well as RM12 PD to the southwest, and then, as previously mentioned, the county to the northwest. Subject property is currently zoned A for agriculture, shown in purple. It is surrounded on all sides by residential zoning developed with detached dwellings, attached dwellings, and multi-dwellings or apartments. This request asks that the property be rezoned to RM12D, which would permit duplexes and attached dwellings. It would not permit apartments. This property has been zoned for agricultural uses since 2000. Zoning is a remnant of the 1966 Douglas County Zoning Code, which permitted a single detached dwelling on 10 acres or a variety of farming uses. When it comes to zoning districts which are a remnant of old code, staff encourages willing property owners to rezone to a compatible district listed in the Land Development Code. This allows property owners to have confidence in how property may be used in the future and provides transparency in applying appropriate land use regulations for development. Development of this property would require preliminary plat and final plat as it is not currently platted. So on your screen is that same colors, but the uses for each of those districts is listed to the right of what's currently existing. Subject property, as mentioned, is a part of the Westwood Hills neighborhood, bounded on the south by Wakarusa Drive and Queens Road to the west. The area includes both conventional zoning and planned development zoning districts. Land uses in the area include detached dwellings, attached dwellings, and multi-dwelling residential developments. Surrounding the proposed rezoning, the immediate area includes platted subdivisions with a mix of residential housing types. The majority of the surrounding area is zoned and developed for detached dwellings. However, multi-dwellings or apartments is found in the Lynx apartment complex to the southwest, and there are attached dwellings located to the east within the planned development zoned area of the Westwood Hills along North Parker Drive. So that red area primarily has attached dwellings or duplexes. The proposed request would allow for the development of attached dwellings and duplex uses in an area that is residential in character and developed with a mix of housing types. If approved, no adverse effects on the neighborhood properties is expected. The uses permitted under the existing zoning district agricultural are not utilizing the existing utility infrastructure available at the site, nor the street network surrounding the property. If the rezoning is approved, prior to development, the property owner would need to submit a major subdivision application. The subdivision would be accompanied by a preliminary plat, a drainage plan, a traffic impact study, including evaluating where and how access is taken into the subdivision, and it would have to follow the density and dimensional standards of the RM12D zoning district. The intent of the request is to bring the property into a modern zoning classification, allowing for continued use and transparency of uses per the Land Development Code. The proposed zoning district, RM12D, would allow a greater density of housing units at 12 units per acre compared to the existing zoning district A, which would only permit one dwelling on the 10-acre property. The change in density is appropriate considering the subject property's proximity to a principal arterial street, Wakarusa Drive, a minor arterial street, Queens Road, and a collector street, Eisenhower. Those are shown on that photo to the right. Public comment was received expressing concern regarding where access would be taken for a development on this property. Per the Land Development Code, access could be taken from any of the surrounding streets, subject to a traffic study, and this would be reviewed further when a major subdivision application is submitted to the planning office. That is not a part of the rezoning application today. A concept plan was provided and is shown before you. It shows the general idea of how development might occur. However, the subdivision will require a preliminary plat and final plat, as mentioned previously. And this concept has not been reviewed by other staff, traffic engineers, fire prevention, or the like. Denial of this request would retain the remnant zoning district of A, agricultural, from the Douglas County 1966 zoning code. The subject property has remained undeveloped since it was annexed into the city in 2000. Approval of the request reduces the land area that is zoned per the previous zoning regulations and moves towards a modern zoning designation for a portion of the remaining planned residential development, Westwood Hills. The full findings of fact can be found in the staff report within the memo update as well. And based on those findings, staff recommends forwarding to the City Commission a recommendation of approval for the proposed rezoning application. That is all I have within my presentation. I believe the applicant is online. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, CC. Mr. Hamby, are you with us?
Yes, sir.
Yes, got 10 minutes if you'd like to add any color to this.
I won't take all the 10 minutes, but I appreciate your time. I appreciate CC's work on this. We've worked pretty closely together on it. I do want to say or add that we had a neighborhood meeting prior to submittal, and we had about 15 attendees that came to that meeting. We invited the notification area plus the Westwood Hills Homeowners Association. And so we had quite a bit of turnout and got quite a bit of feedback from them on it. Traffic and aesthetics, I think, were probably the major issues we covered. And again, that just when we head to the preliminary plat stage, assuming this rezoning is approved, we'll work through some of those issues for traffic and as well. So again, CC covered a lot of the items I was going to cover in my presentation, but I'd be happy to answer the questions, and then if I could reserve a couple minutes at the end just to wrap up, I appreciate it.
You bet. We'll come back to you after public comment. All right, with that, now's an opportunity for the public to comment on this item. If you'd like to share thoughts, comments, please come to the podium. Please give your name, and you have 3 minutes to share your thoughts.
Okay, thank you. I am Pat Willer, and I am a resident on Carver Lane and also a dog walker along the Eisenhower sidewalk on a daily basis. We're trying to convince our dog that it's better to walk at 8 a.m. than 3 p.m. in this weather, but I am vigilant. So this has really been a helpful thing for us because I don't know, I won't speak for everybody, but certainly for myself and some of my other neighbors, I'm not sure we're very familiar with what the planning process was. We really appreciated Mr. Hamby and his group reaching out to have a neighborhood meeting, but we also left more worried when we left the neighborhood meeting than when we went in. So I think that's kind of gets back to that devil's in the details. I am a proponent myself of infill, and it was great to sit here and listen to the proposed plans going forward, and pretty committed to affordable housing. So those were not issues for me, but then it was like, well, now how does this work? And I think that's what we're still trying to figure out as neighbors, and how to make sure that it's a bigger neighborhood, not a neighborhood island sitting in the middle of another neighborhood. And so I don't know that we were clear, I was not clear about whether I was in favor of this change of zoning to happen now, given that there were reservations about the particular project. That's something I hope to learn tonight, and I think I'm figuring this out, but I appreciate that. But in general, and you all got my letter, but really access is a huge issue. Parker Circle is a huge issue anyway, and that would be the main entrance. That's our main entrance. It will remain our main entrance when Queens Road gets, opened up. And it will probably be the same for this new development that's coming in. So access is an issue. Density is an issue. I'd rather see single-family affordable housing than duplexes, simply because it's going to be more owner-occupied and more roots in the community and so on and so forth, from my perspective. But I'm okay with duplexes, and I think I speak for many neighbors saying duplexes are far preferred to or a mix, but are far preferred to apartments, because we do have, the Lynx are good neighbors, they're good dog walkers too, so are the Westfield places across from us, but we got a lot of apartments. We have a large development of homes and then a lot of apartments, and we expect further encroachment as we go along. So that's it, but access is critically important. Temporary access for construction. I mean, Eisenhower is kind of fragile, and particularly at the intersection. So I know there's a policy about not allowing access to streets like Wakarusa or Queens. Maybe something else can happen. In this case, Eisenhower wasn't really set up to do this, and it is very fragile. It's also right next to our neighborhood swimming pool, which also means we've got kid traffic.
I need to ask you to wrap up, please.
Okay, and that's my wrap-up.
Right.
Thank you, and I hope with your comments and from Cece that we can get a little clearer sense of where our input can come in as it goes on.
Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm John Monahan. I've been a resident of Lawrence since 1990. I'm in my fourth home now in Lawrence, all within basically walking distance of one another. But one of the things that I noticed I've always looked for is a neighborhood with a serenity and an ambience that supports both older and younger families and allows you to be able to interrelate at all levels. Right now, I've hopefully downsized into my last home, which is on Eaton Drive in the Westwood Hills, in what they call the Sunset area. But I did go in there with the understanding, with the way that the land was laid out, that the entire area was laid out to become owner-occupied. And I got worried when I saw our M12D, because I didn't know what it meant. When I did see that zoning was duplexes, I know that the enclave, as they call it, which they referred to here as Westwood Hills Townhomes, is comprised of very tastefully done duplexes where there are younger families, retired couples, and working age families living. So it still maintains the ambience of the Westwood Hills as a neighborhood. The thing that I worry about more is when I saw that this classification allowed connected housing, I think it was called, which encompasses row houses, townhouses, and triplexes. I think that congestion is a concern, that you start to put too many people and too many vehicles in a small enough area, it becomes pretty congested. I think if the intent is to keep it similar to what the townhomes are now in the enclave, which has a couple single-family, 3 or 4 single-family homes or more, along with the duplexes, and make it that kind of a tasteful environment. And to, I think, address the egress and access, I know it's early, but I did look at the plat and Parker, that is the first street on the right as you come into that Westwood Hills Sunset from Wakarusa. So if you extended Parker through into this area, that would make good sense to me, because you would still not have any additional congestion running through the existing, the rest of Eisenhower. I think having White, which is the last street on Eisenhower before you get to Queens, extended to run into that area would probably cause an additional congestion of traffic and confusion. There are a lot of children in the neighborhood. I'd suggest that when the plat finally gets laid out, if it's possible to have access off of Queens on one end and use Parker, it'd do what we need to do. But now that I see what the R&D 12 is, I'm not opposed to the construction of it if it maintains the ambience of the neighborhood.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Appreciate you. Appreciate your comments.
Hi, my name is Pat Carrick, and my wife Jean and I have lived at 312 North Eaton Drive, in the neighborhood that is facing this proposed change of zoning in that plot. Our concern is that besides all the houses that are in our neighborhood presently, the zoning is being, Mallard Homes, the owner, is seeking this change in zoning. My understanding is they want to put in duplexes, and if they put in the number of duplexes per acre that zoning permits, which is in 10.2 acres, it would allow 72 duplexes to be built in that area, which would bring in another 150, 200 people into that area with the cars, the congestion that we already have. And I think it is way too dense. If they do go through with that and get this zoning and put in that many duplexes, the place will be totally congested. And if it has two entrances, it would be one coming out of the swimming pool that's in our HOA, and the other would come in from, like Sean said, from White. And there's already tons of traffic in that area right now. So our concern in the neighborhood, and we've lived there since it was created, I think it's just too many people in one small area that's already congested with apartments all around. So we're concerned about the density and the congestion of changing the zoning to that particular code. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening. I'm Kay Breda, and my husband and I live at 5101 Cody Court in Westwood Hills, which is in the Sunset Division. We understand the change of zone, that brings it up to code as it's supposed to be. That's not why we're here. Reading the planning documents attached to this hearing, a supermajority of those documents use infill as a reason to approve the current plan of the 10-plus acre tract. Now, I'm not against infill, but 34 single-family homes would satisfy that intention of the Planning Commission and ultimately the City Commission. However, 72 planned multifamily homes would be overfill. Presently, approximately 160 homes of Sunset Edition and the Enclave Edition, which is the Townhouse Edition, use Eisenhower Road, the only entrance to and exit from the subdivision. That street is less than 3/10 of a mile long. It already has 4 cuts. If you add 2 more cuts, you can imagine what it's going to be. If you use 72 multi-family homes in there, that would be 72 to 140 more vehicles, which would burden Eisenhower way beyond its intention and capacity. As well, Eisenhower is our only emergency entrance and exit, and cars waiting to turn onto the Wakarusa Speedway could only hamper emergency efforts. Approving a 72 multifamily unit would only benefit the developer who doesn't live there. Our neighbors chose and choose to live there because it is a quiet neighborhood of friends walking, running, walking their dogs, riding bikes, and using the swimming pool. But again, on the only road that connects us to the rest of Lawrence. Please do not let Eisenhower deteriorate due to unnecessary overuse. As others have said, construction vehicles of any kind for this tract must use Wakarusa or Queens. Eisenhower is not wide enough, strong enough to endure those vehicles, and it's going to endanger residential use. The present code allows, but does not require, multiple family housing. So I urge you to allow only single-family homes there as infill, not overfill, in an already pretty part of Lawrence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name's Steve Johnson, and my wife and I own a home at 356 North Eaton Drive in the Sunset portion, which is directly north of this planned subdivision. We understood when we moved there, we were the third or fourth house in the subdivision at the time, that this property would probably be planned for an assisted living unit or some kind of a senior living development, and we thought that would be a good idea, and I still think it's a good idea. But it was never envisioned or heard that it would be a highly densely populated area, which would include duplexes, as been discussed. There's a major difference, and I know it was shown very clearly, between the existing duplexes, which we call the enclave, and the new addition as planned. It makes it look like, well, it's no big deal. You know, it's just another group of duplexes. And one of our major concerns, and several people have brought this up, is the fact that the enclave is within their own HOA, homeowner association. They pay dues to that homeowners association. They own their own streets. They maintain that whole subdivision and the people, that whole section called enclave. They maintain it themselves, and they pay a pretty hefty dues for that. And they also pay dues to the overall Westwood Hills Homes Association. As a result, the people that live there and what goes on there makes it a very appealing community of duplex homes. Over here, in what's proposed, there is no suggestion of a homeowners association. There is no idea that we know of dues to be paid or maintenance to be retained or whatever the case may be. We're not even sure they're going to be singly owned. They might be owned and rented as far as we know. We don't know. So as a result, we're very concerned about what that will turn into, and that we feel that it'd probably be best if it was single-family homes. From my point of view, that those folks would have the responsibility and the desire to keep it a nice place and updated and taken care of. The density would be too high, as people have expressed. The traffic would be too great with 72 homes and 150 people or whatever the number might be. We just feel that's a small area for a heck of a lot of people, and it's just going to cause an overflow into our neighborhood that would be untenable at times. So that's basically my opinion. It just kind of referred to a lot of others, but that's where I come from. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Thank you. Anyone else in the room to speak to this tonight? Ellie, is there anyone online to speak to this item? If you are, please raise your hand.
I don't see any hands.
See anything? All right, we're about ready to close public comment. Before I do, just want to make sure that everybody's had an opportunity to share what's on their mind. All right, so we'll close public comment. Mr. Hamby, you have 5 minutes to conclude and respond if you'd like.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. I just wanted to say, as you know, and as CC mentioned, the property is bound by 2 arterial streets as well as a collector street. So, and the traffic study will be done at the preliminary plat stage, which will review that and determine if any improvements are needed. So we understand that density. You know, it's hard to get the actual allowed density in this, even with the density we have shown on that, and that's pretty tight lots. It's only 9.38 units per acre, so that kind of gives you an understanding of. It's hard to push up against that 12, but it's just a little bit more than the previous of 7 units per acre. And with that, I don't think I have anything else. Be happy to answer any questions you might have, though.
Very good. Please stay close. I'm sure there will be questions. And with that, we'll come back to the commission. Anyone like to start?
I'll
Sure.
start. I have some questions for staff. And I can't quite see you.
Yes.
Anyway.
CC or Jeff?
CC, RM12D allows which uses?
RM12D permits duplexes and attached dwellings of 2 units.
It does not permit attached dwellings of 4 units?
Correct.
So what's the difference between a duplex and an attached dwelling of 2 units?
They're pretty similar. I believe attached primarily discusses horizontal. A duplex next to another duplex where they're both ground level, whereas, or a unit and a unit on ground level, whereas a duplex could be up and down.
This is Randy
Becky,
Larkin.
feel free.
This is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney. In an attached houses, each of the dwelling units are on their own lot, but in a duplex, both units are on the same lot.
Okay.
So it'd be like a townhouse for an attached dwelling unit. That's the difference definitionally between an attached dwelling and a duplex.
Each of the attached dwellings are on their own lots?
Each of the dwelling units within the attached dwellings would be on their own lot. So if you had an attached dwelling with 2 units, there would be 2 lots for that property or for that structure.
Could you put more than one attached dwelling on one lot?
Each dwelling unit has to be on its own lot. So there would have to be multiple lots. So
And what about duplexes? Do they have to be on their own lots, or can you put multiple?
in the RM12D district, they do, yes. There's a specific provision in the definition of RM12D that each duplex within RM12D has to be on its own lot. But the 2 dwelling units are on the same lot.
Okay. All right. And I think that's really my questions for staff.
Great question.
To make sure I understood what was being planned here. Is there any requirement that the streets be public, or can they be private streets?
In the RM12D district, public streets are what is required by the regulations.
Okay. Thank you. I have a couple more questions dealing with some of the other findings, and particularly the ones that deal with the findings relative to the comprehensive plan. Would it also be true that some of the findings relative to the comprehensive plan would be that the goal is to maintain the form and pattern of established neighborhoods? Cece, I'm sorry. Would you answer that question?
You said referring to the comprehensive plan.
Yes.
What was that second part? Sorry.
Yes, it's item under the residential development. It's item number 2.1, maintain the form and pattern of established neighborhoods. Is that something that would apply to this application as well as the ones that you have identified?
Yes.
And also would clearly define neighborhood edges by either natural or constructed features apply to this? And would the preserve and enhance the character elements of existing neighborhoods apply?
Yes.
And protect and improve the character and appearance of existing residential neighborhoods to sustain their values and enhance the quality of life? Would that apply?
Yes.
So those would all be appropriate findings as for this neighborhood as it exists, Westward Hills?
Correct.
Okay. And Westward Hills is bounded on the south by Wakarusa, I think you said? And on the west by Queens, the Westwood Hills neighborhood?
So there's a Westwood Hills development plan, of which includes the private streets, North Parker Circle, and that is not bound by Queens. However, I understand the greater neighborhood to be referred to as also including the streets north of the subject property, which are bound by Queens, yes.
Okay, thank you. And so this property is part of, I think, the Westwood Hills neighborhood. I think that's what.
It's not a part of the final development plan.
No, it's not. No, but it's, I think you said it was just part of the neighborhood in your staff report.
Yes, it is adjacent to the neighborhood referred to as such, and it would likely become a part of that neighborhood. I can't speak to the specific neighborhood association by any means, but
and
generally, yes.
Is the area that is zoned PRD and is encircled by North Parker, is that what's being referred to as the enclave?
I believe so in listening to public comment. However, that isn't its formal name. It is the Westwood Hills Townhomes Final Development Plan.
Okay. And that consists of duplexes?
Correct. Or attached dwellings.
And in that area, what is the density?
I'm not certain.
Okay. In the other RS5 and in the RS7 division, the subdivision that's RS7, is that density 7 units per acre?
The zoning district is yes. I've not done a calculation of what the built structure density is.
Okay. But the zoning district that would be immediately to the east of the subject property is RS7?
RS7 is, I think that's 7,000 square foot minimum lot size.
Okay, it's not 7 units per acre.
Correct. The RS districts, the numbers refer to the lot size minimums. In the RM districts, they refer to the dwelling units per acre.
Okay. And we don't know the dwelling units per acre in the RS7.
Give me 1 second, I can do some math real quickly.
Okay.
Well, it can vary, it just all depends on the lot size. So if they're all a minimum of 7,000, that would be one, but there's no limit on the size.
Okay. So there's an RS7 district to the east of the subject property and an RS7 district to the west of the subject property. Is that correct?
Let me share that screen again.
Commissioner
There
Elder.
is RS7 to the north, RS10 to the east, RS7 to the south, RM12 to the southwest.
Okay, all right, on either side of Wakarusa, on the east side of Wakarusa, that seems to be RS7, correct? Or my directions may be just completely wrong. Is that what I'm doing? Okay, all right. I need to turn it around and get north to the, all right. So north and south of the subject property is RS7, is that correct?
Correct.
And so the subject property would be considered infill between these two RS7 developments?
It would be considered infill, not exclusive to those RS7, but in general, yes, considering the property is currently undeveloped.
Okay.
Commissioner Elders, to your question on RS7, that pencils out really, really quickly here to about 6 dwelling units per acre, give or take. I may have not gotten the rounding correct. Your other question about the area to the enclave to the north there, again, very quick sketching of stuff, but it tends to come in right around in parts at 15 dwelling units per acre is the way it's developed. And that, again, very roughly, very quick math, but right around 15.
Thank you very much. And the subject property is going to come in at 12 units per acre?
Correct. RM12 would be at no more than 12 units per acre.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I have no further questions. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Other questions, other comments?
I'll just make a comment to the first public speaker in terms of process. So we're looking at a zoning change now, but a lot of the concerns that were expressed here and in the letters, traffic and screening and design and those sorts of things, are not the question before us tonight, but would be a question and would be an opportunity for you to interact with that at the preliminary plat stage when that comes up. And that's where you would be able to comment on that stage: design, screening, landscaping, traffic studies, stormwater studies, those kinds of things would come up in the preliminary plat. Yes, with a preliminary plat, those would be available. So if I said anything wrong, if staff wanted to add to that, just to talk about the process.
Great point. And to that, I just might like to click in one question. There's been a number of comments around the state of Eisenhower Drive, I think it's called. Would that road be naturally a part of the traffic study that's conducted?
It would be, yes.
All right, very good, thank you. One other question, if I could. I'm a little bit confused about the PRD and A and how that came to be. And I thought I heard a comment made that it had been that, but it was moved back to A with a condition that it could only come out of that rezoning under some condition. Did I understand that right? And if so, what was that and why?
This has got, we learned this very quickly on the fly today as we were going back through the records. And Cece will stop me when I get this a little bit wrong here, but to be qualified to go to the PRD district, there had to be the preliminary development plan had to be filed, and the stipulations related to the sewer had to be completed. And because neither of those were completed, the conditions were never met, so the PRD zoning didn't actually exist. So at that point, it was annexed and it still retained the original county zoning of A agriculture under the 1966 county zoning code. So when the county code updated in 2019-2020, it didn't rezone to AG1, AG2 as you would typically see in the county because it was inside the city limits. So it is zone county A inside the city limits, and there are other instances of that occurring in the past. But the PRD zoning did not go into effect because the conditions associated to that ordinance were never qualified and completed.
All right, so there wasn't some pre-design or conditional artifact of its intended destination in terms of zoning through that. That's just a function of how it managed through all the different code updates that took place.
Yeah, and that's a function of the 66 zoning code that you're seeing in the city in a little bit there, because what you would see nowadays with the application of the plan development would be different than what you would see under the land development code. So there was a little bit of a quirk in that case as it kind of evolved back in the early 2000s.
Gotcha. All right.
I may be able to help on that a little bit. Westwood Hills, that original zoning ordinance, I think was about 136 acres.
Yeah, about give or take.
And that was a planned development. All of it came in at one time into the city, and it was all PRD, but subject to a preliminary and final development plan, which Mr. Hamby would prefer not to use. And the area has developed in chunks, which is why you see some PRD zoning, why you see some RS5, some RS7.
Sure. Got it. Thank you. Appreciate that history. Yes, I'm sorry.
Question for staff. So, given that you discovered today that it was actually zoned A, does that mean that our GIS, all of our maps and databases state that it's PRD?
Correct. The map, if you look at it online, will say it says PRD.
Okay.
And
if I may have a question for Mr. Hanby,
you bet.
And that is, given that approaching this property, you've assumed that it was PRD. Can you tell us a little bit about what are the decision factors that make this more attractive as an RM12? I mean, this property has been vacant for 20 years. In your judgment, why has it not been successful, either by you or by somebody else, as a PRD?
I don't know that I can answer why it hasn't been developed. I mean, that's a developer-driven item.
Sure. But as a developer, I mean, why haven't you taken interest in this property earlier, or looking at it now? Why would you prefer to develop it as an RM12 as opposed to PRD?
Look, just to clarify, I am representing the developer as his engineer.
Oh, sorry about that.
So I'm not the developer of the property, but
thank you.
The PRD is more challenging to develop under just because it's an old zoning code, 1966. You have to go back to those requirements, pull out the old manual, figure out what that means, and then staff doesn't use that every day. And so everybody's combing through the books trying to figure out what applies and what doesn't. There's a lot of chance for errors to be made. It's just a lot more challenging than to use a current zoning code.
Okay, thank you, and apologies for the mischaracterization.
No problem.
Other thoughts, comments, questions? I'll share an observation. As I drove out there today, as a matter of fact, and I saw to the west some pretty significant multi-story, multi-family homes, and I saw to the north single-family residential, and to the south, and then the duplexes to the east. A little bit of undeveloped RS5, which, based on the look of it, I'll be surprised if that ever is developed. And I left there with the impression that there's no doubt that from the RS7 perspective on either side, this will feel like a different footprint of types of homes there. From the standpoint of the other two bodies on either side of it, it's going to feel very, very much the same. That this property's been vacant for over 20 years without any activity, and comes a developer with a great reputation of building good projects, already engaged with the neighbors, and I hope that that continues. RM12 zoning category, to me, while it's different than RS7 on either side, is not a harsh transition between the others that are there. So my sense is to support the applicant. Those are my 2 cents. Yes.
Make another comment. I'm really sensitive to the observations of the neighbors. This does signify an increase in density. As several folks have noticed, it also signifies an increase in traffic volume along Eisenhower Drive. And I bike along Wakarusa a lot. One thing that I would be concerned about is pedestrian and bicycle safety. And of course, that's going to be subject to the traffic study that follows. I would join the chair in, supporting this in principle. I think, given the diversity of development patterns around this property, I think it seems like a reasonable infill project. I would really encourage, Mr. Hanby to look closely at issues of, traffic density and safety, access points, explore the possibility of access points along Wakarusa and Queens. I know, that maybe that presents its own complications, but I think overall it seems like, the right direction for, providing homes for folks, but not without some consequences.
Yeah. Mr. Bruno.
Basically, I would like to echo what you both have just said and make emphasis on that we are currently on a crisis in town when it comes to homes, to affordability and everything that comes with it. And when I see a project like this, which as of today, it's only a rezoning, which I understand that moving forward, we'll see more of this as it develops, and we'll get more feedbacks from the community and the developers. I tend to support this just because it's at least the first step to give the city of Lawrence a little bit of hope when it comes to developments like this in the city.
Thank you, Commissioner Burrow.
Well, I'm not going to support it.
Okay.
And I'm not going to support it because I too have been out there and driven around, and I think that the RS7 neighborhoods, portions of the neighborhood, are not being well represented by the new one. I believe the zoning of RS7 would allow single family and would also allow duplexes with special conditions. I think the density would be less, and I think that would be much more compatible with the neighborhood. I think that this is not in keeping with the neighborhood. I think that it doesn't meet the character of the neighborhood, and I think that the less dense zoning would be compatible with the comprehensive plan. And so that's why I will not be supporting it.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Commissioner Munch, any comments?
And, excuse me, I would be inclined to support this application. I think for the variety of reasons that were noted here earlier, including as well articulated by you, Chair Rexroad. I appreciate your sentiments there that this is would maybe be a different analysis if this was a new development in a sea of single-family zoning, but that's not the case. So I think this is an appropriate and attractive infill project, and I'm inclined to support.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Hayden, do you have any comments or questions before we call for a motion?
I think that I agree with the desired infill, and that this is a good project for that you mentioned and that Commissioner Munch mentioned, and so for those reasons I'll be supporting it.
All right, very good.
We've
been around I'm sorry?
Just a point of clarification, just in the comments we heard, just wanted to clarify the duplexes are not permitted in the RS7 district by either special use or by permitted by a right. So they're not permitted in RS7 at all. So you can do attached, excuse me, I lost my spot there. You can do attached through a special use permit, but not a duplex in the way the code defines it. So I just wanted to clarify.
I obviously get those mixed up. Thank you.
As do I. As do I. So with that, would anyone care to make a motion? Please. Commissioner Ashworth.
I move we approve a request to rezone approximately 10.28 acres from from agriculture to RM12D, located at 5200 Wakarusa Drive, submitted by BG Consultants on behalf of Mallard Properties, property owner of record.
Do I have a second?
Yeah, there's no conditions,
Right,
so.
no conditions.
I'll second.
Shabroda, second. Any other discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. And I just thank you all for your patience, for being here, for your comments, and for your interest in this process. I've got a developer who's got an interest in what you think, and I want to encourage you to continue to stay engaged with them. Help shape what your neighborhood looks like. Thank you all for being here. All right, we have one final item on the formal agenda tonight, and that's to consider a comprehensive plan amendment to Plan 2040, Chapter 5 Transportation. And I want to be clear that our charter tonight in this is not to approve the contents of the transportation plan, but to approve the addition of it into Plan 2040. And I'm just going to stop talking right there.
Yep.
Turn it over to Becca Pepper.
Just give me a moment to remember how to share my screen on Zoom here.
I think we have Becky, Jessica, and Paul tonight. Is that right?
Hit the thing in the top right. The Zoom thing. Yeah, in the top right it says Ellie Mullins.
Yes, there we
Yeah. Yeah, click that. Green button at the bottom says share screen. And
Yes, Thank you. I'm out of practice. Appreciate that. Okay, I think I did it. We good, Kurt?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. And as you mentioned, this last item on the agenda tonight is for a comprehensive plan amendment. I am going to do a brief introduction, then I'm going to get out of the way and get the experts up here so they can give you more information on the transportation plan. But basically, this comprehensive plan amendment would incorporate the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, which is Transportation 2050, into the comprehensive plan, which is Plan 2040. It's federally mandated that the Metropolitan Transportation Plan is updated every 5 years. And so this was most recently updated, became this Transportation 2050 that was updated or adopted by the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Policy Board, Metropolitan Planning Organization Policy Board on March 16th of this year. The comprehensive plan currently includes the transportation plan via Chapter 5, which is the transportation chapter, and also Chapter 8, which is the appendix. And I did want to bring to attention that we incorrectly referenced the section in the appendix in your agenda items. So you might see that it says 8B, specific land use plans, transportation 2040, and by reference with this comprehensive plan amendment would actually be found in 8C, which is the reference plan section. So we'll make those updates as this moves further, but I also there's a PCR attached to this. That's the resolution for this, and that information has been corrected in that document. So moving back to this presentation, the transportation plan, as I mentioned, gets incorporated into the comprehensive plan, and it has since 2011 with the various amendments and updates to that transportation plan. And by doing so, by incorporating it into the comprehensive plan, we're bringing in the goals, objectives, and the strategies of that transportation plan, incorporating that into our comprehensive plan. Additionally, and importantly, the transportation plan includes the major thoroughfares map, and that's the map that designates the street classification systems throughout our roadway. So that's the document that we use with developments and redevelopments to help plan roadway networks. It lets us know the right-of-way widths that are required for those types of streets, access that's required, and those kind of things. So this comprehensive plan amendment to incorporate Transportation 2050 would thereby incorporate that major thoroughfares map. Okay, that's it, all the boring stuff from me, and I'm going to turn it back over to the MPO staff.
Thank you, Becky.
Oh my goodness, Becky, look what happened. That's,
oh, what's happening here?
Did you guys use the new fonts from the city?
probably not on the MPO PowerPoint. Is that, or were we supposed to have? Is this the new? You must translate this document. Oh.
Wingdings.
Can anybody translate wingding?
I don't
speak fluent wingding.
Okay. I don't know if we have access to the server. Yes? Okay. You're good.
This is where good diagrams save the day.
Yeah, well, it's mostly pictures. We maybe would have been okay, but let's not do that. Paul, do you want to get started and talk about it? I'll introduce ourselves first. I'm Jessica Mortinger. I'm the Transportation Planning Manager for the Metropolitan Planning Organization.
And I'm Paul Hornbeck with the MPO. So good evening, commissioners. And so we will give you a brief overview of Transportation 2050 and what went into it process-wise and content-wise. So first, what is an MPO? In case you're not familiar with our faces and haven't met all of you necessarily. So we are a federally required agency for any urban area over 50,000 people. We are required to do transportation planning. So for us, that means all of Douglas County is what we plan for. So City of Lawrence, but also unincorporated Douglas County, Baldwin City, Eudora, and Lecompton.
Yes, can you, are you?
So Transportation 2050 is the region's long-range transportation plan. It obviously looks out to 2050. We identify and evaluate transportation projects and how they fit into the multimodal system. We incorporate we have numerous other plans. We have pedestrian plans, bike plans, transit, safe routes to school. All of those are incorporated into this plan, which serves as kind of the overarching plan for the whole region. It is a performance-based plan, which means we have performance measures that help us track how we're doing and meeting our goals. And it is a federally required document, so it considers planning factors that the federal regulations requires us to look at. It's a collaborative process where we're working with our partners, such as City of Lawrence and other jurisdictions, as well as KDOT and KTA. And it helps set a vision for the region's transportation system and services. As Becky mentioned, it is updated every 5 years at a minimum. And those federal performance measures I mentioned are included to help track how we're doing. And lastly, it needs to be fiscally constrained, meaning that the projects identified are reasonably expected to be afforded with expected funding available for the region.
I got it right
Oh,
here.
you got it?
It's on
Okay.
this one.
All right. Where are we? So throughout the process, we had 3 major points for public engagement in the process. And we had a steering committee, which helped guide the process and vet our work and the public input that we received.
And we'll point out that 2 planning commissioners serve on our MPO policy board, Commissioner Carter and Commissioner Thomas, to represent the city and the county. And both of those members served as steering committee members on the development of our plan.
Okay, next slide. So a big part of our process was community engagement, and that helped guide the plan and what our priorities were. So a major outreach in the beginning of the process included surveying. Over 700 surveys were conducted through different events, tabling at the library, farmers market, other locations around town. It was around 20 events we attended. We also conducted interviews with numerous stakeholders, different partners that we work with, and some of them you would expect, like KDOT and other transportation providers. Others may be less expected, like the Just Food, the food bank, and those types of agencies that we try and understand the transportation needs of some of their clients. So we heard what the top priorities were. It was pretty clear that safety was number 1 concern for people, affordable and accessible transportation, and reduce the environmental impacts were the other top priorities. Next. And then we also asked about level of satisfaction based on different modes of transportation. So for walking was the mode that people had the most satisfaction with. 3.7 out of 5 was the score it received. And 43% of respondents indicated they walk to get around. And we asked what factors influence their satisfaction. So some of the things that people mentioned or selected were drivers not watching or yielding for people crossing streets or on the sidewalk, incomplete sidewalk network, and sidewalks in need of repair. The next most satisfied mode would be automobile, personal cars, and factors impacting that satisfaction was cost to own and operate a car, roads in need of repair, and drivers not following the rules of the road. Public transport was next, and top factors impacting satisfaction were the length of time it takes to reach destinations, routes not going where people want to go, or schedule not meeting people's needs. And lowest satisfaction was bicycling, and some of the major factors there were an incomplete network, difficult to transport children or groceries or large items, and destinations being too far away. So from all that community engagement and from what we heard, we created these 5 goal areas: transportation options, shared prosperity, sustainability, safety and security, and operations and maintenance. Not necessarily going to read each goal and objective for you. I know it's getting late, but we had, I'll just note, we had 4 of these areas in the last plan. We broke them down a little bit further to have them a little more focused, so we have 5.
We'll talk a little bit about what that means in terms of projects and other components of the plan that we're required to put together. The piece you're probably most familiar with is the major thoroughfares map, and we took the opportunity to update this through a process of consulting with our stakeholder partners and laying out some additional detail within Tier 1 to ensure you have adequate street connectivity and the hierarchy of streets to move people, goods, and services as we think about how our community transportation network works in terms of connectivity. Our document actually has a couple versions of street classification. This is the one that is tied to the code. There's also a federal classification that's separately tied to how federal funding is distributed. And I will note, you pay attention because the classifications aren't the same on the streets. They're defined a little bit differently. And so that matters for how we report performance measures and funding resources. But this, we detailed, there was very little within the existing city limits that was changed, except for where recent or undeveloped development potential had reclassified, thinking in like the Rock Chalk Park area. But we really took the opportunity to look at where in that Tier 1 we're looking at, particularly to the west, and some connectivity related to some of the southeastern part of the community. And in our public process, we showed people exactly what we were talking about adding or changing in relationship to classifications. And that was something we collected feedback on additionally. This plan has to be fiscally constrained. So we collect financial information from every local government and our state partners in the area to make reasonable projections based on historical funding estimates. And we show you what those are for each mode of transportation. And so you can see overall, the pie is getting bigger in terms of our resources availability, and there's been some shifting in the pie from our previous assumptions made around our financial projections for T2040. Probably the biggest contributor to some of that is the change in the sales tax for the built environment work related to development of transit facilities. I think that contributed to a large decrease on the transit. There's been a large increase from 2% to 5% for non-motorized, for bike ped, and I'll show you what that means a little bit broken down in a second. And that, I think, is attributed to the success of all of the governments, local governments in our region, getting transportation alternative grants and their expectation to continue to pursue that type of funding for development of projects. We think a lot about transportation as an off the top. So we think about O&M as our responsibility to maintain our current assets and what we have, and are showing to our federal partners our obligation to that. And so out of this $2.4 billion in projected revenue between now and 2050, we anticipate $985 million of that is going to be contributed to O&M at the current level we have a projected O&M to be, which leaves $1.4 million for projects. And that matters because regionally significant and federally funded transportation projects need to be specifically listed in the Metropolitan Transportation Plan to be eligible for federal funding. So when we're talking to people, we're translating a lot of information about all the financial information in our projections about our capacity within that space, and what that means here on each card. Remember, this is for all the governments in the region, and that you can see kind of broken down what that means per year. And we tried to show people what it means, what it costs for transportation projects. And so we gave people some examples of different types of amenities or projects they may be familiar with, and the cost of what we anticipate those to be projected to cost, to show kind of a context of where we're at with our financial capacity and also where we're at in terms of what it's reasonable to expect to achieve from that funding. That resulted in a submission of existing committed projects in capital improvement plans from the cities and the county and KDOT. And also we then evaluate all of those projects against environmental justice zones, which I'll talk about on the next slide. It's in yellow on the smaller countywide map. And then we also talk about them in relationship to transportation disadvantaged populations. So we're doing some equity analysis to understand the impacts of the anticipated projects in our region and to see who they're impacting and what type of improvements we are anticipating within the scope of work of these projects. And that's part of an evaluation we're doing is our commitment to equity. Environmental justice zones is a federally defined terminology, and it's looking at low to moderate income tracts and minority block groups. And very specifically, we take from community development block grants. From HUD definitions, the low to moderate income definition for households in our community with 50% or more of the population residing in a household earning less than 80% of the area's median income. And then we also have the opportunity to establish what we consider minority block groups in our region. And we believe that when we evaluated this methodology, we set the threshold of 135% as the county of the county average to assess block groups with high concentrations of minority populations. So we feel like these areas in addition to our transportation disadvantaged populations are areas that we need to pay attention to in terms of disparity and impacts of transportation investment and disinvestment throughout our community. And so we evaluate projects on that level. In more detail, here's part of the list, but we show kind of how we do that. We talk about the type of project, if it's in the zone, and what the scope of improvement that's anticipated. So if there's multimodal improvements, if it's just pavement condition, if it's safety improvements. And overall, we found favorably to, newer standards obviously have made things safer, and now with complete streets policies and other desires to make connected networks for bike and ped, that we're anticipating improvements from projects, particularly those in areas with EJ and transportation disadvantaged populations. I will point out this doesn't include standalone bike ped projects. We don't project those in the same way as this long-range vision for roadway projects, and so we would add that in addition to this, that there's improvements being made particularly in those areas. We have a plethora of performance measures in the plan, some of which are federally required and some of which aren't. I'd encourage you to take a look at our performance report. This is our second plan that we've done as a performance-based plan, so it should give you some indication about how our region is performing in relationship to national performance for some of those national performance measures, where you can look it up for every MPO who has to track those same measures, and some of our locally prioritized measures in terms of bike and ped access, or looking at urban density and other things that we report as a factor of our plan. We have taken the content of this plan development to Multimodal Transportation Commission and our MPO Technical Advisory Committee, which is the advisory committee to the MPO Policy Board, and they both recommended approval at their March meetings. Also in March, the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Board adopted Transportation 2050, and now we are in the process to recognize and update the recognition in the comprehensive plan to bring these plans into alignment. Be happy to entertain any questions you may have about the work that we did or the content of our document.
Thank you.
Because Becky has one more slide here. Yeah.
All right, so with that, it's hard to follow that, so I'll just say, staff is recommending that approval of this requested comprehensive plan amendment.
Is there anyone from the public online to speak to this? No one's here in the room. I don't see anyone. I think we're the last ones. So to the commission, any questions, comments? It's just an amazing body of work, and I feel like it doesn't do us justice just to vote and go, but I mean, there's just so much here. It's an incredible body of work. So thank you for all the time you put into that.
And if I may, I'd just like to make a comment. I, as a representative from the MPO Policy Board, also representing the Planning Commission. I came in as a steering committee member fairly, late in the process, 2/3 of the way in or so. And I just wanted to say, I'm trying to avoid superlatives, but I mean, it was really rewarding working with Jessica and Paul. Their expertise, their ability to communicate complex concepts to a bunch of lay people, and also their responsiveness to both our comments and to public comment, their ability to incorporate, either respond. There was one part of the process where they had to, what's the word? Not necessarily respond to, but digest hundreds of comments from the public, and their ability to either say, well, that's already something we've covered, or this is something we're going to be covering in a different context, or just their ability to gosh, it's late for me, integrate all of this feedback was really impressive. So I just wanted to thank you and your team for that.
They weren't phoning it in.
They were definitely not phoning it. Well, actually, they were zooming it in. So thanks.
Any other comments?
No, just look forward to seeing some of this on the ground. So.
All right. Are there 2 votes here?
Correct. There would be a vote to approve the comprehensive plan amendment and a vote to authorize the chair and vice chair to sign the planning commission resolution associated to it.
Thank you. Anyone care to make that first motion to approve the comprehensive plan amendment?
Do you want to do that?
If I may, I'll go ahead and move that we recommend approval. Are we recommending approval or are we approving? We're approving.
You are approving.
Okay. I would move that we approve the Plan 2440 Comprehensive Plan Amendment, incorporating the new Transportation 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan and forwarding it to the City Commission and Board of County Commissioners with a recommendation for approval.
Thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Brodo, any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Oh.
That carries. Timing's a little off.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. There's one more motion, if you care to, or wherever you'd like
Sure.
to take
I
that.
would move that we approve and authorize the chair and vice chair to sign the Planning Commission Resolution PCR-23-00226.
A second? Second. Mr. Munch. Any discussion? In favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And it carries. One last item. That concludes the agenda for tonight. One last item in miscellaneous. I just want to welcome our newest commissioner, Jane Eldridge. I have to say that we met for a little bit Monday and just kind of went through the packet, talked about things, and I left that conversation with my jaw hanging up. Oh my gosh, such a wealth of experience and knowledge. I am certainly, over the time we served together, learned so much from her. Did not realize that it was going to start tonight. Welcome, welcome. Thanks for jumping right in.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here, and I can't keep my mouth shut.
Yes.
So you will
You're
have to tell me
going to
to
fit
shut up.
right in. Not going to happen. Good for you. Good for you. Anyone care to make a motion to adjourn for tonight?
So moved.
Mr. Chair, if I may, before we go to motion to adjourn, under miscellaneous new or old business on your agenda, just want to put that open for everybody. Staff has one item. It is becoming that time of the year again where we do your annual orientation towards the fall. So you will be seeing us start to put an email out that will have a poll for possible dates. So keep that in mind. I think the commission has always preferenced a Friday because it's kind of the way we do it. So we'll kind of pick on Fridays going down the line. But we'll kind of get that out and get that going here. And I know it's just like, on the cusp of being August, but we got to get that started now. So.
Those are full day sessions, which, different from our other meetings.
Correct. It'd be full day, probably planning development services, and we'd go through the usual things, but it would be 9 to 4, 8 to 3, somewhere in there probably. But
full day as opposed to all night. Thank you for that. Do you have anything else?
Not from staff.
Motion to adjourn, I think I heard. Is there a second? Second. Discussion. In favor, aye.
Aye.
And we're out. Thank you all very much. Staff,
All right.
Jeff and team, brilliant, brilliant job. Thank you so much.